97% of service workers become invisible after their first year on the job. They learn to smile through exhaustion, to anticipate needs without being asked, to exist in the margins of other people's lives without leaving a trace. At 9:47 p.m. on a rain-soaked Tuesday in October, Sophia Delacroix did none of those things. She saw everything. The dinner rush at Marcello's Italian restaurant had the familiar rhythm of controlled chaos. Steam rose from plates of ossobuco and chicken parmigiana, the scent of garlic and basil thick enough to taste. Sophia moved between tables with the fluid precision of someone who had memorized every crack in the ceramic tile, every wobble in Table 7's left leg, every tell that signalled a customer was about to become a problem. Her black uniform hung loose on her thin frame, the fabric cheap enough that it would need replacing in a month. The apron tied around her waist bore the permanent stains of 1,000 meals she couldn't afford to eat. Her feet ached in the worn sneakers that had carried her through 18 months of double shifts. The rubber sole of her left shoe had separated just enough to let in water when it rained, which it always seemed to be doing lately. Rain drummed against the restaurant's front windows, turning the street outside into a blur of headlights and neon reflections. Sophia balanced 4 plates along her left arm while reaching for the coffee pot with her right hand. Table 12 needed fresh bread. Table 15 was ready for their check. The man at Table 3 had been nursing the same glass of wine for 40 minutes, checking his watch every few minutes with the nervous energy of someone expecting bad news. "Sophia!" The voice belonged to Maria Benedetti, the restaurant owner's wife, whose arthritis had been getting worse with each passing month. "Take the corner booth when they come in." Sophia glanced toward the front entrance, where rain continued to streak the glass. "Who's coming in?" "You'll know." Maria's expression carried the weight of someone who had run a restaurant in this neighbourhood for 32 years. She had seen the rise and fall of local businesses, the subtle shifts in power that most people missed entirely. "Just remember, we serve everyone the same. Good food, good service, no questions." The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees when the door opened. 2 men entered first, moving with the practiced awareness of people who catalogued threats before they ordered appetizers. They wore suits that fit too perfectly to be bought off the rack, their eyes scanning the dining room with methodical precision. Behind them walked a man who commanded attention without demanding it. His charcoal grey suit was tailored to a terrifying perfection, the fabric catching the restaurant's warm lighting in a way that suggested it cost more than Sophia made in 6 months. Dark hair, silver at the temples, framed a face that could have been carved from marble. His eyes were the colour of winter storms. In his arms he carried a small boy. The child couldn't have been older than 6, dressed in miniature formal wear that mirrored his father's elegant style. But where the man projected controlled power, the boy seemed to fold in on himself. Small hands clutched a red toy car with the desperate grip of someone holding on to the last solid thing in an unstable world. His dark hair fell across his forehead, partially hiding eyes that held too much sadness for someone so young. The restaurant's ambient conversation didn't stop, but it softened. Other diners instinctively lowered their voices, though most couldn't articulate why. The hostess, usually confident to the point of bravado, fumbled with menus and spoke in a voice barely above a whisper. Sophia found herself assigned to their table before she consciously decided to move. Her feet carried her across the dining room, past the nervous glances of her co-workers, past the suddenly fascinating pasta specials that other customers pretended to study. "Good evening," she said, approaching their corner booth with the same steady composure she brought to every table. No fawning, no nervous energy, just professional competence wrapped in genuine warmth. "Can I start you with something to drink?" The man's eyes met hers, and for a moment something flickered across his expression. Surprise, perhaps, or recognition of something he hadn't expected to find in a place like this. "Coffee for me, black." His voice carried the subtle authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question. "And what would you like, Marco?" The boy named Marco looked up at Sophia with eyes that seemed far too old for his young face. He clutched his toy car tighter, as if afraid someone might take it away. "Chocolate milk?" The words came out as barely more than a whisper. Sophia knelt beside their table, bringing herself to Marco's eye level. The gesture was instinctive, natural, the same movement she made when talking to her neighbour's children. "That's a beautiful car," she said, nodding toward the toy. "Is it a Ferrari?" Marco's grip on the car loosened slightly. "It's a 1967 Mustang Fastback." His voice grew a little stronger. "My mama gave it to me." "Your mama has excellent taste in cars." Sophia's smile reached her eyes, transforming her tired features into something genuinely warm. "I bet she told you all about how fast it can go." For the first time since entering the restaurant, Marco's posture straightened. "She said it could outrun anything on the road if it needed to." The man watched this exchange with an intensity that Sophia could feel without looking at him directly. There was something in his stillness that reminded her of a predator assessing whether something was prey or threat. But when she finally glanced up, his expression held an unexpected gentleness. "Ooh, 1 chocolate milk for the owner of the fastest car in the restaurant," Sophia said, rising to her feet, "and I'll get that coffee started right away." As she moved toward the kitchen, Sophia became aware of the subtle changes in the restaurant's atmosphere. The couple at table 8 had paid their check early and left. The businessman at table 3 had abandoned his barely touched wine and disappeared into the night. Even without knowing who these customers were, people sensed the shift in energy that came with genuine power. But Marco had smiled. Just for a moment, talking about his car and his mother, he had looked like the child he was supposed to be. Sophia returned with their drinks, setting the chocolate milk in front of Marco with a paper napkin folded into the shape of a butterfly. It was a trick she had learned years ago, working at a diner in the part of town where tips were small, but children's smiles were frequent. "How did you do that?" Marco asked, his eyes widening as he carefully unfolded the napkin butterfly. "Magic," Sophia said with mock seriousness, "but I can only teach it to people who know about fast cars." This time, Marco's laugh was genuine, a sound that seemed to surprise both him and his father. The man's posture relaxed by degrees, though his eyes never stopped their subtle surveillance of the room. "Are you ready to order, or would you like a few more minutes?" Sophia asked, pulling out her order pad. She had learned not to assume what customers wanted, regardless of how expensive their clothing or how important they seemed. "The lady can order first," Marco said solemnly, as if reciting a lesson he had been taught. "I'm not dining tonight, sweetheart," Sophia said gently. "I'm working, but thank you for being such a gentleman." The man studied her for a long moment. "What would you recommend?" It was a simple question, but Sophia sensed it carried more weight than it appeared to. This wasn't a man who often asked for advice, particularly from someone he had just met. "The osso buco is exceptional tonight. Maria uses her grandmother's recipe, and she's been making it for 30 years. But if you're looking for something lighter, the chicken piccata is perfect for this weather." "And for Marco?" Sophia considered the boy, who was now running his toy car along the edge of the table, making soft engine noises under his breath. The spaghetti and meatballs never disappoints, and if he's still hungry after that, the tiramisu is made fresh every morning. "Perfect," the man said, closing his menu. "And Sophia?" She looked up, surprised that he knew her name. Then she remembered the name tag pinned to her uniform, the small plastic rectangle that marked her as staff rather than customer. "Thank you for the magic trick." As Sophia walked away to place their order, she caught sight of her reflection in the restaurant's front window. Rain still streaked the glass, distorting her image, but for a moment she looked different, more solid, more present, less invisible. She didn't know that the man at the corner table was Vincent Torino, whose name appeared in newspaper headlines and FBI case files with equal frequency. She didn't know that his business empire included legitimate enterprises and ventures that existed in the shadows between legal and illegal. She didn't know that the toy car clutched in his son's small hands was the last gift from a mother who had died 6 months ago in a car accident that still haunted both father and son. What she knew was that a small boy had laughed for the first time in too long, and his father had noticed her enough to learn her name. In a life measured by tips and rent payments, by double shifts and aching feet, that felt like something close to magic. Outside, the rain continued to fall, and somewhere in the distance, thunder rolled across the city like a warning of storms yet to come. The call came at 2:47 in the afternoon, while Sophia was helping Marco build a more structurally sound castle from blocks instead of cereal boxes. Mrs. Chen answered the phone in the kitchen, and Sophia could hear the sharp intake of breath that signalled bad news travelling through expensive marble hallways. "Miss Sophia!" Mrs. Chen called, her voice carefully controlled, but carrying undertones that made Sophia's blood turn to ice water. "You have a phone call." Sophia's hands stilled on the wooden blocks, her maternal instincts immediately cataloguing Marco's position and the fastest routes to safety. The boy was absorbed in creating turrets for his castle, humming softly to himself with the kind of contentment that children found in simple tasks. He hadn't yet learned to recognize the sounds that preceded danger. "Marco, sweetheart, keep building while I take this call," Sophia said, forcing her voice to remain steady. "I'll be right back." Mrs. Chen met Sophia in the hallway, extending the phone with hands that trembled slightly. The older woman's face carried the particular pallor that came from receiving news that changed everything. "It's Luigi," Mrs. Chen said quietly. "There's been a problem." Sophia accepted the phone with fingers that felt numb and distant. "Luigi?" "Sophia." Luigi's voice carried strain and something that might have been pain. "We need you to bring Marco to the safe house, now." "What happened?" Sophia's question came out as barely more than a whisper, though part of her already knew that she didn't want to hear the answer. "The meeting went wrong. Coretti had more men than we expected, better intelligence than we thought possible. Vincent—" Luigi's pause stretched long enough for Sophia's heart to stop beating entirely. "Vincent is alive, but he's hurt, badly hurt, and Coretti's people are looking for leverage." Sophia felt the floor seem to shift beneath her feet, the mansion's elegant hallways suddenly feeling like a trap rather than a sanctuary. "How badly hurt?" "Bad enough that we can't move him yet. Bad enough that he needs medical attention we can't provide at the safe house. Sophia, they know about you. They know about Marco. Coretti's people are coming here." The words hit Sophia like physical blows, each revelation worse than the last. Vincent was wounded and vulnerable. Their enemies knew about the family he had tried so hard to protect. And somewhere in the city, dangerous men were converging on the mansion with the intent to use a 6-year-old boy as leverage against his injured father. "How long do we have?" Sophia asked, her practical mind already calculating what needed to be done to keep Marco safe. 20 minutes, maybe less. Pack light, move fast. Anthony is on his way to escort you to the safe house, but if Coretti's people get here first—" Luigi didn't finish the sentence, but Sophia understood the implications. She and Marco would become hostages, bargaining chips in a game where Vincent's love for them had become his greatest weakness. "I understand," Sophia said, surprised by the steadiness of her own voice. "We'll be ready." She ended the call and stood for a moment in the hallway, allowing herself exactly 10 seconds to feel the fear and despair that threatened to overwhelm her rational thinking. Vincent was hurt, possibly dying. Their home was about to become a battleground, and she was responsible for getting Marco to safety before armed men arrived to destroy the life they had built together. 10 seconds. Then Sophia Delacroix, former waitress turned protector, began to move with the decisive efficiency that had made her invaluable to the Torino family. "Mrs. Chen," Sophia said, her voice carrying authority she hadn't known she possessed. I need you to pack a bag for Marco, clothes for 3 days, his favourite toys, anything that will comfort him if we have to stay away for a while. Can you do that?" Mrs. Chen nodded, her professional training overriding her obvious fear. "Of course. What about you?" "I'll handle my own things, and Mrs. Chen, if anyone comes to the house asking about Vincent or Marco, you don't know anything. You're just the housekeeper, and the family is away on vacation." Sophia returned to the living room where Marco continued to build his castle, blissfully unaware that his world was about to change again. The sight of him, dark hair falling across his forehead, small hands carefully placing blocks with architectural precision, nearly broke her heart. This child had already lost his mother to violence and circumstance. Now his father was wounded and in hiding, and Sophia was about to uproot him from the only stability he had known since Elena's death. "Marco," Sophia said, kneeling beside him with the same gentle care she had shown that first night at Marcello's. "We need to take a little trip." Marco looked up at her with eyes that seemed too old for his 6-year-old face. "Is Papa in trouble?" Sophia felt her throat constrict at the boy's intuitive understanding. Marco had learned to read adult faces for signs of danger, to interpret the subtle cues that meant his world was about to shift in ways beyond his control. "Your Papa is handling some business problems," Sophia said carefully, "and while he does that, we're going to stay somewhere safe until everything gets worked out." "Like when Mama went to the hospital?" Marco's question was quiet, almost whispered, as if speaking too loudly might make his fears come true. Sophia's heart clenched at the comparison. Marco was remembering the last time he had been told that someone he loved was handling problems that required him to wait somewhere safe. That time, his mother hadn't come home. "No, sweetheart," Sophia said firmly, gathering him into her arms with fierce protectiveness. "Not like that. Your papa is very strong, and he has very good people helping him. We're just going to wait somewhere comfortable until he can come get us." Marco studied her face with the intense focus that children brought to evaluating adult truthfulness. "Promise?" "I promise that I will do everything in my power to bring your papa home to us," Sophia said, choosing her words with careful precision. She couldn't promise that Vincent would survive whatever had gone wrong at his meeting with Salvatore Coretti, but she could promise that she would fight with everything she had to protect the family they had built. "Okay," Marco said, his trust in her complete and absolute. "Should I bring my cars?" "Bring your favourite ones," Sophia replied, already moving toward the stairs to pack her own emergency bag. "We'll come back for the rest when it's safe." 15 minutes later, Sophia stood in the mansion's front hallway with Marco at her side and their hastily packed bags at her feet. Mrs. Chen had included everything a displaced child might need, from familiar toys to comfort foods that would make an unfamiliar place feel more like home. Sophia's own bag contained practical clothing, basic toiletries, and the small amount of money she had managed to save during her 3 weeks as part of Vincent's household. "Miss Sophia," Mrs. Chen said quietly, pressing something small and hard into Sophia's palm. "Master Vincent left this for emergencies." Sophia looked down to find herself holding a car key attached to a simple metal ring. Not the key to Vincent's armoured town car or any of his obvious vehicles, but something more discreet. "The blue Honda in the back garage," Mrs. Chen explained. "Clean papers, full tank, cash in the glove compartment. If something goes wrong and Anthony doesn't make it here in time." Sophia pocketed the key, understanding that Mrs. Chen was providing her with options that Vincent had planned for but hoped would never be necessary. Even wounded and under attack, Vincent had thought ahead far enough to ensure that Sophia and Marco would have a means of escape if his primary security arrangements failed. "Thank you," Sophia said, the words carrying weight far beyond simple gratitude. A car door slammed outside, followed by rapid footsteps on the mansion's front walkway. Sophia's heart rate spiked as she calculated whether they had time to run or whether they were already trapped. "It's Anthony," Mrs. Chen said, peering through the security monitor by the front door. "But there are other cars on the street, cars that don't belong to the neighbourhood." Sophia felt ice forming in her stomach as she realised that Salvatore Coretti's people had arrived almost simultaneously with their rescue. The timing was too precise to be coincidental. Someone had been feeding information to Vincent's enemies, someone who knew enough about the household routine to predict exactly when Sophia and Marco would be most vulnerable. "Back door," Sophia said decisively, taking Marco's hand and moving toward the kitchen. "We use the Honda." "But Anthony," Mrs. Chen began. "Anthony will have to take care of himself," Sophia interrupted, her maternal instincts overriding everything else. "My job is to get Marco somewhere safe, and right now that means we don't wait to see whether the men at the front door are friends or enemies." She led Marco through the kitchen and out the back door, moving with the kind of focused determination that came from having a clear objective and no time for second-guessing. The blue Honda was exactly where Mrs. Chen had indicated, tucked between Vincent's collection of expensive sports cars like a deliberate afterthought. "Sophia," Marco said as she buckled him into the back seat, "are the bad men here?" "I don't know, sweetheart," Sophia replied honestly, starting the car with hands that remained steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her system. "But we're not going to wait around to find out." As they drove away from the mansion through tree-lined streets that had become as familiar as home, Sophia caught sight of black sedans converging on Vincent's property. Men in expensive suits were getting out of those cars, and their movements carried the purposeful aggression of people who had come to collect what they believed they were owed. "Sophia," Marco said from the back seat, his voice small and scared. "I want Papa." "I want him too, sweetheart," Sophia replied, navigating through traffic while her mind raced ahead to the safe house address that Luigi had given her. "And we're going to see him just as soon as it's safe." But as Sophia drove deeper into the city with Vincent's son in her care and Vincent's enemies behind them, she couldn't shake the feeling that safe was something that existed only in the spaces between one danger and the next. Their family had been scattered by violence, their home had been invaded by enemies, and the man she loved was wounded and hidden somewhere she couldn't reach. All Sophia could do was drive toward an uncertain sanctuary and hope that the strength she had found in protecting this family would be enough to hold them together until Vincent could come home. The safe house was a modest two-bedroom apartment in a neighbourhood that specialised in minding its own business, the kind of place where expensive cars attracted unwanted attention and people asked fewer questions about tenants who paid their rent in cash. Sophia had been there for 6 hours, watching Marco try to build castles with unfamiliar blocks, while her mind churned through increasingly desperate scenarios about Vincent's condition. Luigi had called twice with updates that weren't really updates. Vincent was stable but unconscious. The doctors Vincent's organisation kept on retainer were doing everything they could. Salvatore Coretti was making increasingly aggressive demands for a meeting that Vincent obviously couldn't attend. And somewhere in the city, dangerous men were looking for a 6-year-old boy and the woman who had become his unofficial mother. "Sophia," Marco said, abandoning his half-built castle to climb onto the couch beside her. "I'm scared." Sophia gathered him into her arms, feeling the familiar weight of his trust and the crushing responsibility that came with it. "I know, sweetheart, I'm scared too." "What if Papa doesn't get better? What if the bad men find us? What if we have to live here forever?" Marco's questions tumbled out in the rapid succession of childhood anxiety, each fear leading to the next in an endless chain of what-ifs. "Then we'll figure it out together," Sophia said firmly. "Whatever happens, you're not alone. I'm not going anywhere." Marco studied her face with the intense focus he had inherited from his father. "Even if Papa dies?" The question hit Sophia like a physical blow, partly because of its brutal directness and partly because she had been trying not to think about that exact possibility. "Even then," she said quietly, "you're my family now, Marco. That doesn't change no matter what happens to anyone else." The boy nodded with the satisfied air of someone who had received the reassurance they needed. then settled against her side with the boneless relaxation of children who trusted completely in adult protection. Sophia held him close, breathing in the scent of his shampoo and trying not to think about all the ways she might fail to keep the promises she was making. Her phone buzzed with an incoming call, Luigi's number. "Luigi," Sophia answered, keeping her voice low to avoid disturbing Marco's fragile peace. "Sophia, thank God. Listen carefully. We've got a problem." Sophia felt ice forming in her stomach at Luigi's tone. What kind of problem? "Coretti's people found the safe house. They're on their way. You need to move now." "How?" Sophia's question came out as barely more than a whisper. "How did they find us?" "Someone's feeding them information. Someone who knows our protocols, our safe houses, our emergency procedures. We've got a leak in the organisation, and until we plug it, nowhere is secure." Sophia looked around the modest apartment that had felt like sanctuary only moments before, now seeing it as the trap it was about to become. 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, limited exit routes. If Coretti's men had the building surrounded, she and Marco would be sitting ducks. "Where do I go?" Sophia asked, already moving toward their hastily packed bags. "If all your safe houses are compromised, where can I take Marco that they won't think to look?" Luigi's pause stretched long enough for Sophia's heart to hammer against her ribs. "I don't know," he admitted finally. "Vincent always handled the emergency protocols, without him conscious to give directions." The implications hit Sophia with crushing weight. She was on her own, in a city where powerful men wanted to use a 6-year-old boy as leverage against his wounded father. No safe houses, no backup plans, no resources except her own intelligence and desperation. "How long do I have?" Sophia asked, lifting Marco into her arms while grabbing their bags with her free hand. "Minutes, maybe less. They're in the building." Sophia could hear it now. Footsteps in the hallway, voices speaking in the kind of controlled whispers that meant people were trying to move without attracting attention. Marco had heard it too, his small body going tense against her shoulder. "Sophia," Marco whispered, "are those the bad men?" "Yes, sweetheart," Sophia replied, carrying him toward the apartment's back window. "But we're going to be smarter than they are." The window opened onto a fire escape that led down to an alley behind the building. Sophia could see black sedans positioned at both ends of the alley, blocking the obvious escape routes. But between the sedans and the fire escape was a narrow gap that led to the building next door. A Chinese restaurant that stayed open late and would have customers coming and going even at this hour. "Marco," Sophia said quietly, "I need you to hold on tight and be very quiet, okay? We're going to play a game where we're invisible." Marco nodded with the solemn understanding of someone who had played similar games before, wrapping his arms around Sophia's neck and pressing his face against her shoulder to muffle any sound he might make. Sophia climbed through the window and onto the fire escape, moving with the careful precision of someone who understood that one wrong step could mean capture or death. The metal grating groaned slightly under their combined weight, but not enough to alert the men she could hear moving through the apartment building below. They made it down 2 flights before Sophia heard the safe house door being kicked in above them. Voices shouted in Italian, furniture crashed as the apartment was searched, and someone began giving orders in the kind of angry tone that meant they had discovered their targets were gone. Sophia reached the alley level and moved quickly toward the gap between the sedans, using parked cars and dumpsters for cover, while Marco stayed perfectly still in her arms. The boy's trust in her was absolute, his faith that she would keep him safe both heartbreaking and terrifying in its completeness. "There!" a voice shouted from above. "The fire escape!" Sophia broke into a run, abandoning stealth for speed as she raced toward the Chinese restaurant's back entrance. Behind her, she could hear footsteps clattering down the metal stairs, voices shouting coordinates and directions, the particular chaos that accompanied a manhunt in an urban environment. The restaurant's back door was unlocked, opening into a kitchen that smelled of garlic and hot oil. Sophia burst through with Marco still in her arms, startling the cooking staff and drawing concerned exclamations in rapid Cantonese. "Emergency!" Sophia gasped to the head chef, an elderly man whose eyes were sharp enough to recognize genuine desperation when he saw it. "Bad men chasing us, child in danger." The chef looked at Marco's frightened face and made a decision that probably saved both their lives. He gestured toward the dining room, speaking quickly to his staff in Cantonese, and suddenly Sophia found herself being guided through the restaurant toward the front entrance, while the kitchen staff closed ranks behind them. "Thank you," Sophia whispered, but the chef was already ushering her toward the door. "Go," he said simply. "Be safe." Sophia emerged onto a busy street where normal people were going about their evening routines, completely unaware that a 6-year-old boy and his protector were running for their lives. She hailed the first taxi she saw, climbing into the back seat with Marco while trying to think of somewhere, anywhere, that Salvatore Coretti's people wouldn't think to look. "Where to?" the driver asked, his accent suggesting he was probably from somewhere in Eastern Europe and unlikely to be connected to either the Torino or Coretti organisations. Sophia gave him the address of the one place she could think of that might offer sanctuary, Marcello's Italian restaurant. It was where everything had started, where she had first proven her willingness to protect Vincent's son. If there was anywhere in the city that might be truly neutral ground, it would be Maria's kitchen. "Sophia," Marco whispered as the taxi navigated through traffic, "are we going to see Maria?" "We're going somewhere safe," Sophia replied, though she wasn't entirely sure that was true. "Somewhere the bad men won't think to look for us." Marco nodded and settled against her side, his trust in her judgment absolute, despite everything they had been through. Sophia held him close and watched the city lights blur past the taxi's windows, her mind racing ahead to the confrontation she knew was coming. Because eventually this chase would have to end. Eventually she would have to stop running and start fighting. And when that moment came, Sophia knew that she would discover just how far she was willing to go to protect the child who had become her entire world. The taxi pulled up outside Marcello's just as Sophia's phone rang again. Luigi's number. "Sophia, thank God you're alive." Luigi's voice carried relief and exhaustion in equal measure. "Vincent's awake. He's hurt, but he's conscious and he's asking for you." Sophia felt tears of relief streaming down her cheeks. "Is he going to be okay?" "He's going to live. But Sophia, he wants to see you, both of you. He says he has something he needs to tell you before this thing with Coretti goes any further." Sophia looked at Marcello's familiar facade, at the warm light spilling from windows that had once seemed to represent the ordinary world she was leaving behind. Now it looked like the only sanctuary left in a city that had become a hunting ground. "Tell him we're coming," Sophia said. "Tell him we're both safe and we're coming home." As she paid the taxi driver and lifted Marco into her arms one more time, Sophia realised that she had finally stopped running. Whatever Vincent needed to tell her, whatever confrontation with Coretti's organisation was still to come, she would face it standing beside the man she loved and protecting the child who had become her son in every way that mattered. The war for their family was far from over, but Sophia had finally learned something that changed everything. She wasn't just the woman who took care of Vincent's child anymore. She was the woman who would kill to protect him. 6 months later, Sophia Delacroix stood in the same corner booth at Marcello's Italian restaurant, where she had first served Vincent and Marco Torino, but everything about her had changed. Gone was the cheap uniform and exhausted resignation of an invisible waitress. In their place was a woman who wore confidence like armour, dressed in a tailored charcoal blazer that spoke of wealth earned rather than inherited, her posture carrying the quiet authority of someone who had learned to command respect through action rather than demand it through position. Marco sat beside her, no longer the traumatized 6-year-old who had clutched his toy car like a lifeline. At 7, he possessed the easy confidence of a child who knew himself to be absolutely loved and completely protected. His school backpack lay beside him on the booth's leather seat. Homework completed, his attention focused entirely on the elaborate drawing he was creating for his father's return, from his business trip to Chicago. "Sophia," Marco said, holding up his picture with the pride of an artist unveiling a masterpiece. "Do you think Papa will like the castle I drew for him?" Sophia examined the drawing with the serious consideration that Marco's artistic efforts deserved. The castle was elaborate and colourful, complete with towers, flags, and what appeared to be a moat populated by friendly dragons. But what caught Sophia's attention was the 3 figures standing in front of the castle: a tall man in a dark suit, a woman with long hair, and a small boy holding what looked like a red car. "I think your papa will love it," Sophia said, her voice carrying the warm certainty of someone who had learned to see the world through Vincent's eyes. "He'll probably want to frame it and put it in his office." "Really?" Marco's face lit up with the kind of joy that transformed ordinary moments into treasured memories. "Maybe he'll show it to Luigi and Anthony too." "I'm sure he will," Sophia replied, though her attention had shifted to the restaurant's front entrance, where a familiar figure was approaching through the late afternoon shadows. Vincent Torino moved with the fluid grace that had never quite left him, despite the 3 weeks he had spent recovering from injuries that could have killed him. The scar along his left temple was barely visible now, and his expensive suit concealed the places where Salvatore Coretti's bullets had found their mark before Vincent had ended that particular threat permanently. But Sophia could see the subtle changes in his posture, the way he favoured his left side when he thought no one was watching, the new lines around his eyes that spoke of pain endured and battles won at considerable cost. "Papa!" Marco shouted, abandoning his drawing to launch himself into his father's arms with the unreserved enthusiasm of childhood. Vincent caught his son with practised ease, his smile transforming his face from something carved from marble into something warm and entirely human. "Hello, son. Were you good for Sophia while I was gone?" "Very good," Marco announced, with the satisfaction of someone who had exceeded expectations. "I did all my homework, and I helped Sophia cook dinner 3 times, and I only had 1 nightmare, but Sophia made it go away by reading me the story about the brave knight." Vincent's eyes met Sophia's over Marco's head, carrying gratitude and something deeper that still made her breath catch, despite 6 months of learning to read his expressions. Did she? That was very kind of her. "Sophia's the best at making nightmares go away," Marco said with the absolute certainty of someone stating an obvious fact. "She's the best at everything." Sophia felt warmth spreading through her chest at Marco's declaration, the kind of contentment that came from knowing that she had found her purpose in protecting and nurturing this extraordinary child. But it was Vincent's expression that made her heart race. Pride, love, and recognition of the woman she had become in the months since Tony Breslin had first threatened his family. "How did Chicago go?" Sophia asked as Vincent settled into the booth beside them. Marco maintaining contact with his father through the casual touches that children used to reassure themselves that important people hadn't disappeared. "Successfully," Vincent replied, his tone carrying the satisfaction of someone who had resolved a complex problem through decisive action. "The Torino organization now has exclusive distribution rights throughout the Midwest. Our former competitors have decided to pursue other business opportunities." Sophia understood that Vincent's carefully neutral language concealed negotiations that had probably involved the kind of permanent solutions he preferred to keep separate from family conversations. But the result was clear. The territory disputes that had endangered their family were resolved. The internal betrayals had been identified and eliminated, and Vincent had consolidated power in a way that would protect Marco's future. "And Salvatore Coretti?" Sophia asked quietly. "No longer a concern to anyone," Vincent replied, with finality that closed the subject entirely. Marco looked between his father and Sophia with the particular alertness of children who sensed that adults were discussing important things in coded language. "Does this mean we're safe now? Does this mean nobody's going to try to hurt us anymore?" Vincent's hand found his son's dark hair, fingers threading through the soft strands with the gentle affection that never failed to surprise people who knew him only by reputation. It means we're as safe as anyone can be in this world, Marco, and it means that the people who love you will always do everything in their power to protect you." "Like Sophia did when the bad men came to our house?" Marco asked with the directness that made adult conversations both easier and more complicated. "Exactly like Sophia did," Vincent confirmed, his eyes moving to her face with an intensity that made her pulse quicken. "Sophia proved that she's willing to risk everything to keep you safe. That makes her family in every way that matters." Sophia felt tears pricking at the corners of her eyes, though she wasn't entirely sure whether they were tears of relief, gratitude, or the overwhelming love that had grown between them through shared danger and mutual protection. 6 months ago, she had been a waitress whose greatest concern was making rent on time. Now she was part of a family that existed at the intersection of love and violence, bound together by choices that had changed all of them irrevocably. "Sophia," Vincent said quietly, "there's something I want to ask you." He reached into his jacket pocket and produced a small velvet box that made Sophia's heart stop beating entirely. Around them, Marcello's continued its familiar rhythms, the clink of silverware against plates, the murmur of conversation, the scent of garlic and basil that had provided the backdrop for the most important moments of their relationship. "Vincent," Sophia whispered, suddenly aware that every person in the restaurant was probably watching their table. 6 months ago, you threw yourself between my son and armed men without a moment's hesitation," Vincent said, his voice carrying across the dining room with perfect clarity. "You took a blow meant for him, you protected him when I couldn't, and you proved that love isn't something you feel, it's something you do." Marco was bouncing slightly in his seat, his excitement barely contained as he watched his father prepare to ask the question that would make their unconventional family official. "Sophia Delacroix," Vincent continued, opening the box to reveal a ring that caught the restaurant's warm lighting like captured starlight. "Will you marry me? Will you be Marco's mother and my wife, and the heart of everything I'm trying to build?" Sophia looked at the ring, a princess-cut diamond surrounded by smaller stones that probably cost more than she had earned in her entire previous life, and realized that the answer had been written in her heart since the moment she had chosen to shield Marco from Tony Breslin's violence. "Yes," she said, the word coming out stronger and more certain than she had expected. "Yes, I'll marry you." Vincent's smile was like sunrise after the longest night, transforming his face into something that belonged more to hope than to the dangerous world he navigated daily. He slipped the ring onto her finger with hands that were perfectly steady, despite everything they had survived to reach this moment. "Finally," Marco announced with satisfaction. "I've been waiting forever for Papa to ask you properly." Sophia laughed through her tears, gathering Marco into a hug that included Vincent and encompassed the strange, violent, beautiful life they had built together. "Forever, sweetheart. It's only been 6 months." "That's forever when you're 7, Marco replied with the logic of childhood. "Besides, I knew you were going to be my new mama the first night when you made the napkin butterfly. Papas don't usually remember those kinds of magic tricks." Vincent's arms tightened around both of them, creating a cocoon of warmth and safety in the middle of a restaurant that had witnessed the beginning of their story. "What do you say we go home?" he suggested. "I think this calls for a celebration." As they prepared to leave Marcello's, Sophia caught sight of her reflection in the restaurant's front window. The woman looking back at her bore little resemblance to the exhausted waitress who had served Vincent and Marco that first night. This woman wore confidence like a second skin, carried herself with the quiet authority of someone who had proven her worth under fire, and smiled with the contentment of someone who had found her place in the world. She wasn't invisible anymore. She never would be again. Outside, Vincent's armoured town car waited at the curb, but this time Sophia wasn't a frightened employee being driven to safety. She was Vincent Torino's fiancée, Marco's chosen mother, and a woman who had learned that the most dangerous thing in the world wasn't the violence that surrounded their lives. It was the love that made that violence worthwhile. The waitress was gone. Long live the Queen. Vincent Torino had learned to read rooms the way other men read newspapers. Every entrance was calculated, every gesture deliberate, every silence measured for maximum effect. But tonight, as he settled into the corner booth at Marcello's, with Marco cradled against his side, he found himself studying not the exits or the sightlines, but the young woman who had knelt beside their table without fear. The restaurant's energy had shifted the moment he walked through the door. Conversations didn't stop, but they softened to whispers. Silverware clinked more carefully against plates. The couple near the window paid their check with unnecessary haste, leaving half their pasta untouched. These were the familiar rhythms of power, the unconscious choreography that followed him through most of his waking hours. Sophia Delacroix moved through this changed atmosphere as if nothing had happened at all. Vincent watched her navigate between tables, her movements economical and precise. She refilled water glasses without being asked, anticipated needs before customers voiced them, maintained the same warm professionalism with every patron, regardless of how their behaviour had shifted since his arrival. There was no performance in her composure, no artificial brightness designed to curry favour with the dangerous man in the expensive suit. She simply worked. "Papa, why is everyone being so quiet?" Marco's whisper carried the particular clarity of children's observations, cutting straight to truths that adults preferred to ignore. Vincent's hand found his son's dark hair, fingers threading through the soft strands that reminded him painfully of Elena. 6 months since the accident, and Marco still asked questions that had no good answers. "Sometimes people get nervous around strangers, Marco. It doesn't mean anything." It wasn't entirely a lie. Vincent had built his reputation on being a stranger to fear rather than befriend, but Marco didn't need to understand that particular inheritance. Not yet. Maybe never, if Vincent could help it. The boy's attention drifted back to his toy car, small fingers tracing the miniature lines of the 1967 Mustang Fastback that had been Elena's pride and joy. She had driven the real version until Marco was born, trading speed for safety in the way that parenthood demanded. The car sat in Vincent's garage now, covered and untouched, too precious to drive and too painful to sell. "Here we go," Sophia said, appearing at their table with plates that steamed in the restaurant's warm air. "Osso buco for you, and spaghetti with the biggest meatballs in the kitchen for the gentleman with the very fast car." She set Marco's plate down with a flourish that made the boy giggle, then placed Vincent's dinner before him with the same care she might show a regular customer. No deference, no nervous energy, no recognition that his presence had caused 3 tables to empty in the past 20 minutes. Vincent had been watched by federal agents who showed more awareness of who he was. "Would you like fresh pepper on either of those?" Sophia asked, peppermill already in hand. "Yes, please," Marco said, his politeness carrying the careful pronunciation of someone who had been taught to mind his manners. "My mamma always put lots of pepper on her pasta." Sophia smiled as she ground fresh pepper over his spaghetti. "Your mamma sounds like someone with excellent taste. Pepper makes everything better." Vincent observed this exchange with the same attention he brought to business negotiations. There was nothing calculated in Sophia's interaction with Marco, no attempt to ingratiate herself with the man who could clearly afford to tip well. She spoke to his son with the genuine warmth of someone who simply enjoyed children's company. "And for you?" Sophia asked, turning to Vincent with the peppermill poised. "Thank you." He watched her hands as she worked, noting the steadiness of her grip, the absence of tremor that marked most people's interactions with him. Her fingers were long and graceful, despite the calluses that spoke of years spent carrying heavy plates and scrubbing stubborn stains. No rings, no jewellery, except for a simple silver chain that disappeared beneath her uniform collar. "Can I get you anything else right now?" Vincent found himself reluctant to dismiss her back to her other tables. "How long have you worked here?" "About 18 months. Sophia's answer came without hesitation, though something flickered in her eyes that suggested the question wasn't entirely routine. Maria and Giuseppe hired me when I moved to the neighbourhood. And before that? Now she paused, her professional smile wavering just enough to reveal something more complex underneath. Different restaurants, same work. She adjusted her grip on the pepper mill, a small tell that Vincent filed away for future consideration. I'll let you enjoy your dinner, just wave if you need anything. As she walked away, Vincent catalogued details with the unconscious thoroughness that had kept him alive in a business where information meant power. Sophia carried herself like someone accustomed to being overlooked, but her awareness of the room rivaled his own. She had noted which customers had left early, registered the subtle changes in mood, adapted her service style to accommodate the shift in energy. She was observant, competent, unafraid, and she had made Marco laugh. "Papa, the lady is nice," Marco said around a mouthful of spaghetti. "She talks to me like Mama did." Vincent's chest tightened at the comparison. Elena had possessed the same natural warmth, the same ability to see through pretense to the person underneath. She had been the only one who could make Marco smile in those early days after his birth, when colic had turned their son into a tiny, furious mystery that Vincent couldn't solve with money or influence. "She is nice," Vincent agreed, cutting into his osso buco. "Eat your dinner." The meal proceeded with the comfortable quiet that had become their routine. Marco ate with the methodical determination of someone still learning to use adult utensils, occasionally pausing to run his toy car along the table's edge. Vincent ate more slowly, his attention divided between his son and his surveillance of the restaurant. Luigi Costello sat at the bar, nursing a whiskey and pretending to read the sports section. Vincent's security detail positioned to look like ordinary customers rather than bodyguards. At this distance, Luigi looked like any other middle-aged man unwinding after a long day, but Vincent knew the Glock 19 concealed beneath his jacket and the tactical awareness that made him invaluable. Anthony Russo occupied a table near the front window, his presence serving as both early warning system and deterrent. Anthony's suit cost less than Vincent's, but his eyes missed nothing. He had already identified the restaurant's exits, catalogued the staff, and memorised the faces of every customer who had entered since they arrived. Normal precautions for abnormal lives. Sophia returned to check on their table twice during the meal, each time with the same professional warmth that seemed untouched by the restaurant's altered atmosphere. She asked Marco about his car, complimented his efforts with the spaghetti, and treated Vincent with the courteous attention she might show any customer. By the time she brought the tiramisu, Vincent had made his decision. "This looks amazing," Marco said, his eyes widening at the dessert's generous proportions. "Maria makes it fresh every morning," Sophia said, setting down small spoons for both of them. "And there's extra ladyfingers on the side, just in case you're still hungry after all that spaghetti." "Thank you, Sophia." Vincent's use of her name carried subtle weight, the kind of attention that marked the difference between staff and someone worth remembering. "You've taken excellent care of us tonight." Something in his tone made her pause, her professional mask slipping just enough to reveal curiosity. "It's my job, but thank you for saying so." "Sophia." Vincent kept his voice low, though he knew Luigi and Anthony would hear every word. "I'd like to speak with you before we leave, if you have a moment." Now uncertainty flickered across her features, though she kept her composure intact. "Of course, I'll be right back." Vincent watched her retreat toward the kitchen, noting the way other staff members glanced in his direction with expressions ranging from curiosity to concern. Maria Benedetti emerged from behind the counter, her weathered face carrying the wisdom of someone who had navigated the complex loyalties of neighbourhood business for 3 decades. "Marco, finish your tiramisu," Vincent said quietly. "We'll be leaving soon." "Are we coming back?" Marco asked, his spoon pausing halfway to his mouth. "I like it here. I like Sophia." Vincent studied his son's face, seeing something there that had been absent for too long. Interest, engagement, the first signs of healing from the devastating loss that had shaped their lives for the past 6 months. Maybe, Vincent said, though he already knew the answer. We'll see. When Sophia returned, she carried herself with the same steady professionalism, though Vincent detected tension in the set of her shoulders. You wanted to speak with me? Sit down for a moment. Sophia glanced toward the kitchen, where Maria watched their interaction with undisguised interest. I should probably get back to my other tables. They'll wait. Vincent's tone carried the quiet authority of someone unaccustomed to having his requests questioned. Not harsh, but absolute. Please. Sophia slid into the booth opposite them, her posture careful and alert. This close, Vincent could see the faint scar along her left temple, mostly hidden by her hair. Evidence of some old injury, healed but not forgotten. Her hands rested flat on the table, steady despite whatever nervousness she might be feeling. Marco seems very comfortable with you, Vincent began, his voice pitched low enough to avoid carrying to nearby tables. He's a wonderful boy, Sophia replied, her eyes moving to Marco, who was making his toy car navigate around the tiramisu plate. Very polite, very sweet. His mother died 6 months ago. The words fell into the space between them with the weight of something Vincent rarely shared with strangers. Sophia's expression softened, genuine sympathy replacing professional courtesy. I'm so sorry, she said, and Vincent heard the authentic grief in her voice. I can't imagine. He doesn't talk much anymore, doesn't laugh, doesn't play the way children should. Vincent paused, measuring his next words carefully. Until tonight. Sophia's gaze moved between Vincent and Marco, understanding beginning to dawn in her eyes. Mr. Torino. You know who I am? It wasn't a question. Her use of his name confirmed that she had pieced together his identity at some point during the evening. I suspected. Sophia's honesty was refreshing in a world where most people either fawned or fled. The restaurant, people don't usually react that way to ordinary customers. And yet you treated us like ordinary customers anyway. Sophia considered this, her thumb worrying the edge of a napkin. Everyone deserves good service, and Marco deserves to be treated like the child he is, not like whatever else comes with your world. Vincent felt something shift in his chest, a recognition of integrity that he encountered too rarely in his daily interactions. I have a proposition for you, Sophia. I'm listening. Marco needs someone who can see him the way you do, someone who isn't afraid of me, isn't impressed by money, isn't trying to gain advantage through a 6-year-old boy. Vincent kept his voice steady, though he could feel the weight of this moment. Someone who makes him laugh. Sophia went very still, her hands flat against the table. What exactly are you asking? I'm offering you a job, taking care of Marco, being the kind of presence in his life that helps him remember how to be a child. The silence stretched between them, filled with the soft sounds of the restaurant around them and Marco's quiet car noises. Vincent could see Sophia processing the implications, weighing possibilities against risks. I don't know anything about being a nanny, she said finally. You know how to care about people. You know how to see what they need without being told. You know how to make a frightened child feel safe. Vincent leaned forward slightly, his intensity carefully controlled. Everything else can be taught. Sophia's eyes found Marco again, watching as he carefully constructed a garage for his toy car using sugar packets and a butter dish. Something in her expression told Vincent that she was already imagining herself in that role, already seeing ways she might help heal the hurt that had settled so deeply in his son. Why me? She asked. Because in 18 months of working here, you're the first person who made him smile. The weight of that statement settled between them. Vincent could see the moment Sophia understood the true scope of what he was offering and what he was asking in return. I need time to think about it, she said. Of course. Vincent reached into his jacket, producing a business card that bore only his name and a phone number. Take all the time you need, but don't take too long. Sophia accepted the card with fingers that only barely trembled, sliding it into her apron pocket without looking at it. "How much time?" "Marco starts a new school on Monday. I'd prefer to have someone in place by then." 4 days. Vincent watched Sophia absorb this timeline, saw her mental calculations as she weighed the decision that could change everything. "Papa, I'm done," Marco announced, pushing away his empty tiramisu plate with satisfaction. "Can we come back tomorrow?" "We'll see, son." Vincent stood, helping Marco slide out of the booth. "Say thank you to Sophia for taking such good care of us." Marco looked up at Sophia with the solemn gravity of a child delivering an important message. "Thank you for the magic napkin and for talking to me about cars. You're really nice." Sophia's smile transformed her tired features into something luminous. "Thank you for telling me about your Mustang and for being such good company." As they prepared to leave, Vincent placed 3 $100 bills on the table, a tip that would cover Sophia's rent for the month. Not a bribe, but a gesture of respect for service well rendered. "Think about it," he said quietly. "Marco needs someone like you." Sophia nodded, her hand unconsciously moving to the pocket where his card waited. "I will." Vincent guided Marco toward the door, noting how his son turned back twice to wave at Sophia. Outside, the rain had softened to a mist that caught the streetlights like suspended diamonds. The Blacktown car waited at the curb, Anthony already behind the wheel and Luigi sliding into the passenger seat. As they drove through the city's gleaming streets toward the mansion that served as fortress and home, Vincent found himself thinking, not about the evening's business calls or tomorrow's meetings, but about a young woman whose hands didn't shake and whose smile could make a grieving child remember joy. Marco fell asleep in his car seat, clutching his red Mustang and dreaming, Vincent hoped, of paper napkin butterflies and chocolate milk served with kindness. In the distance, thunder rolled across the autumn sky, and Vincent wondered if the storm was just beginning. The rain had stopped by the time Tony Breslin stumbled through Marcello's front door at 10:23 p.m., but the storm inside him was just beginning to rage. He moved with the unsteady confidence of someone 3 drinks past their limit, his construction boots tracking mud across Maria's carefully maintained floor. His flannel shirt was unbuttoned at the collar, revealing a neck thick with muscle and old tattoos that spoke of choices made in younger, angrier years. Sophia noticed him immediately. She was clearing table 15 when the door chimed, and something in the way he surveyed the dining room made her hands pause over the abandoned wine glasses. Tony's eyes moved from table to table with the calculating aggression of someone looking for weakness to exploit. His gaze lingered too long on the young couple sharing dessert near the window, dismissing them as unworthy of his attention. He scanned past the elderly man reading his newspaper at table 7, past Maria wiping down the bar, settling finally on the corner booth where Vincent and Marco sat in quiet conversation. Vincent had noticed Tony's entrance as well. Sophia could see it in the subtle straightening of his posture, the way his hand moved almost imperceptibly closer to Marco's shoulder. But Vincent's expression remained calm, his attention ostensibly focused on his son's animated description of a drawing he had made at school. "Papa, do you think Sophia would like to see my picture of the car?" Marco asked, his voice carrying clearly across the restaurant's hushed atmosphere. "I made it red like mine, but bigger, like the one in your garage." "Maybe next time, son," Vincent replied, his tone gentle, but his eyes tracking Tony's movement toward the bar. "Finish your milk." Tony ordered whiskey, his voice loud enough to carry across the dining room. "Make it a double, and none of that cheap stuff. I can tell the difference." Maria's expression tightened as she poured his drink, her movements careful and measured. She had been running this restaurant long enough to recognize trouble when it walked through her door, drunk and looking for confrontation. "That'll be $12, she said quietly. $12 for whiskey?" Tony's laugh held no humour. "Lady, I pay less than that for a whole bottle." "That's the price," Maria replied, her voice steady despite the tension building in her shoulders. "Good whiskey costs good money." Sophia continued clearing table 15, but her awareness sharpened with each passing moment. The young couple had noticed Tony's aggressive energy and were quietly asking for their check. The elderly gentleman had folded his newspaper and was reaching for his wallet. Even without understanding the specific dynamics at play, the restaurant's patrons sensed the shift in atmosphere that came with genuine hostility. Only Vincent remained perfectly still, his attention apparently devoted to Marco's chatter about school and cars and the magic napkin trick that Sophia had shown him earlier. Tony threw back his whiskey in one swallow and slammed the glass down hard enough to make the bottles behind the bar rattle. Another one? "I think you've had enough for tonight," Maria said carefully. "Maybe I can call you a cab? Maybe you can mind your own damn business and pour my drink." Tony's voice rose enough to draw concerned glances from the remaining customers. "I got money. I got a right to spend it where I want." Sophia found herself moving closer to their table, ostensibly to refill water glasses, but really to position herself where she could intercept trouble before it reached the corner booth. Marco had started to notice the loud man at the bar, his small face creasing with the particular anxiety that children felt when adults began behaving unpredictably. "Papa," Marco whispered, his fingers tightening around his toy car, "why is that man so loud?" Vincent's hand found his son's, offering the quiet reassurance that came naturally after 6 months of helping a traumatized child navigate a world that felt dangerous and unpredictable. "Some people forget to use their inside voices, Marco. It's nothing for you to worry about." But Sophia could see the tension building in Vincent's jaw, the barely controlled stillness that reminded her of a predator deciding whether to attack or retreat. His protective instincts were warring with his need to shield Marco from violence, creating a dangerous pressure that needed careful handling. Tony accepted his second whiskey with the grudging satisfaction of someone who had won a meaningless battle. He turned to survey the dining room again, his alcohol-flushed face wearing an expression of contempt for the restaurant's quiet elegance. "Nice place you got here," he announced to no one in particular. "Real fancy. Bet you charge fancy prices for fancy food that don't taste no better than what I can get at the diner down the street." Maria ignored him, focusing on cleaning glasses that were already spotless. The remaining customers studiously avoided eye contact, hoping to become invisible until the dangerous drunk either left or was removed. Tony's attention fixed on the young couple near the window, who were whispering urgently to each other while the man signed their credit card receipt with obvious haste. "What's the matter, pretty lady?" Tony called out. "Don't like sharing the room with real working men?" The woman flushed red but kept her eyes down, while her companion placed a protective hand on her shoulder and guided her quickly toward the exit. Tony's laughter followed them out the door, ugly and satisfied. "That's enough," Maria said, her voice carrying the authority of someone defending her territory. "You need to leave, now." "I need to leave?" Tony's voice climbed another octave. "Lady, I ain't done nothing but order a drink and make conversation. This is America. I got rights." Sophia watched this confrontation unfold while maintaining her position between Tony and the corner booth. Marco had gone quiet, pressing closer to his father's side with the instinctive fear of prey sensing a predator nearby. Vincent's stillness had taken on a quality that made Sophia's skin prickle with recognition of imminent violence. She had seen this dynamic before in the rougher establishments where she had worked during her first years in the city. Men like Tony fed on intimidation and grew bolder when their targets showed fear. The smart play was to give them what they wanted: attention, respect, the acknowledgement of their power, until they grew bored and moved on to easier prey. But Vincent Torino was not prey, and his son's distress was making him dangerous. Tony finished his second whiskey and turned his attention back to the dining room, his eyes settling on Vincent's expensive suit and perfectly styled hair. Here was a target worthy of his resentment, a representative of the privileged class that Tony blamed for his own failures and frustrations. Well, well, Tony said, pushing away from the bar with the exaggerated care of someone fighting their own balance. Look what we got here. Fancy suit, fancy watch, fancy little kid. He took a step toward their table, swaying slightly. You think you're better than the rest of us, don't you? Vincent's voice, when it came, was perfectly controlled. I think you should finish your drink and go home. You think I should go home? Tony's laughter held a sharp edge. You think you can tell me what to do? Marco whimpered softly, a sound that cut through Sophia like a physical blow. She watched Vincent's hand tighten on his son's shoulder, saw the moment when paternal protection began to override tactical caution. Sophia made her decision. She approached Tony with the same professional composure she brought to every difficult customer, carrying a fresh bar towel and wearing the kind of smile that had diffused 100 potential confrontations. "Excuse me," she said, stepping into Tony's line of sight. "I think there might be a problem with your order. Can I help you with something?" Tony's attention swung toward her, his alcohol-hazed focus taking a moment to register her presence. "Problem with my order? Lady, I ordered whiskey and got whiskey. That ain't complicated math." "Of course not," Sophia agreed, her voice carrying the soothing tone of someone accustomed to managing volatile situations. "I just noticed you seemed frustrated, and I wanted to make sure we were taking good care of you." "Taking good care of me?" Tony's expression shifted, suspicion mixing with the possibility of female attention. "You think I need taking care of?" Sophia maintained her smile, despite the warning bells clanging in her head. "I think everyone deserves good service, and I think maybe you've had a long day." Tony studied her face, looking for mockery or condescension and finding only professional courtesy. "Yeah, well, some of us work for a living instead of sitting around in fancy restaurants pretending to be important." His voice had risen again, and Sophia could feel the attention of everyone in the restaurant focusing on their interaction. Vincent's stillness had taken on the quality of a coiled spring, ready to explode into violence at the first sign of threat to his son. "I understand," Sophia said, though she kept her distance from Tony's swaying form. "Working construction is hard work, honest work." Tony's surprise at being recognised and respected was evident in his momentary pause. "Damn right it's honest work, more honest than whatever pretty boy over there does for his money." He gestured toward Vincent's table, his movement unsteady but his intent unmistakable. Marco pressed closer to his father's side, small hands clutching his toy car with white knuckles. Sophia felt the temperature in the room seem to drop 10 degrees. "Why don't I get you some coffee?" she suggested, desperately trying to redirect Tony's attention away from the corner booth. "On the house, and maybe some of Maria's bread. It's fresh from the oven." "I don't want coffee," Tony snarled, his brief moment of civility evaporating. "I want respect. I want people to stop looking at me like I'm dirt under their expensive shoes." His voice had become loud enough to carry clearly across the restaurant, and Sophia could see Marco's face crumpling with the particular terror that children felt when safe spaces became threatening. The boy's distress was visible in every line of his small body, and Sophia knew that Vincent's patience was measured in seconds rather than minutes. "I respect you," Sophia said firmly. "You work hard, you pay your bills, you have every right to be here. But maybe we could keep our voices down. There are families trying to enjoy their dinner." Tony's eyes narrowed as he registered what he perceived as criticism. "Families? You mean like Mr. Moneybags over there with his spoiled little brat?" The words hung in the air like a slap. Sophia watched Vincent's face transform, saw the moment when the careful father disappeared and something far more dangerous took his place. His eyes went flat and cold, and when he spoke, his voice carried the kind of quiet menace that made Tony take an unconscious step backward. "What did you say about my son?" Marco began to cry, not the loud wailing of a tantrum, but the quiet, terrified sobs of a child who had learned that the world was full of people who meant harm. The sound seemed to fill the restaurant, drowning out the soft jazz music and the gentle clink of silverware. Sophia saw Vincent begin to rise from his seat, saw the deadly intent in his movement, and knew that everything was about to spiral beyond anyone's control. In that moment, she understood that she was standing at the centre of a storm that was about to break. Tony's drunken aggression, Vincent's protective fury, and Marco's traumatized terror were converging into a collision that would leave someone bleeding on Maria's carefully maintained floor. The barrier between the ordinary world and Vincent's dangerous reality was about to shatter, and Sophia was the only one positioned to prevent the devastation that would follow. Thunder rumbled in the distance, though the rain had stopped hours ago, and Sophia realized that some storms had nothing to do with weather. The silence that followed Vincent's question was heavy, suffocating. It pressed against the walls of Marcello's like a living thing, transforming the warm family restaurant into something that felt more like a crime scene waiting to happen. Tony Breslin swayed on his feet, alcohol-flushed face cycling through confusion, defiance, and the first flicker of genuine fear as he processed what he had walked into. Vincent Torino stood slowly, his movement deliberate and controlled. At 6 feet 2 inches, he commanded the room simply by existing in it, but now his presence carried the weight of barely contained violence. His expensive suit couldn't disguise the predator that lived beneath the civilized exterior, and Tony was finally beginning to understand that he had made a catastrophic miscalculation. "I asked you a question," Vincent said, his voice pitched low enough that every person in the restaurant had to strain to hear it. Somehow that quiet tone carried more menace than shouting would have. "What did you say about my son?" Marco's sobs had quieted to terrified whimpers, small hands pressed against his eyes as if he could make the scary man disappear by not looking at him. The toy car lay forgotten on the table, its bright red paint catching the restaurant's warm lighting like drops of blood. Sophia felt her heart hammering against her ribs as she calculated distances and possibilities. Vincent's bodyguards, she had identified them during the evening service, were already moving. The man at the bar had set down his newspaper and turned slightly in his chair, ready to intervene. The one near the window had paid his check but hadn't left, his attention focused entirely on Tony's swaying form. They were waiting for Vincent's signal, all of them. "Look, buddy," Tony began, his bravado cracking as sobriety began to cut through his alcoholic haze. "I didn't mean nothing by it, just talking, you know, having a conversation." "A conversation." Vincent repeated the words as if tasting something sour. "You called my son a spoiled brat in front of him while he was crying." Tony's Adam's apple bobbed as he swallowed hard. "Kids cry. It's what they do. Nothing personal." Vincent took a step forward and Tony instinctively backed away, his coordination compromised enough that he stumbled slightly. The movement brought him closer to Sophia, close enough that she could smell the whiskey on his breath and see the sweat beading on his forehead as he finally began to grasp the depth of his mistake. "Nothing personal," Vincent echoed. "My son lost his mother 6 months ago. He has nightmares. He barely speaks to anyone except me. And you." His voice dropped even lower, becoming something that seemed to bypass the ears entirely and strike directly at the nervous system. "You decided to traumatize him for entertainment." Sophia watched Tony's face cycle through a range of expressions as the implications hit him. Whatever he had expected when he stumbled into Marcello's looking for trouble, it hadn't been this. He had wanted to intimidate some rich businessman, to feel powerful and important for a few minutes before stumbling home to his empty apartment. Instead, he had targeted the child of someone whose name appeared in newspaper headlines and federal investigations with equal frequency. "I didn't know," Tony whispered, his earlier aggression evaporating like steam. "About his mother, I mean. I wouldn't have if I'd known." "But you didn't know," Vincent interrupted, taking another step forward, "because you didn't care. You saw a child who was upset, and instead of feeling sympathy, you felt contempt. Marco's whimpers had drawn the attention of every person left in the restaurant. An elderly woman at table 9 was clutching her purse and looking toward the exit. A young man dining alone had his phone in his hand, thumb hovering over what Sophia assumed were emergency contact numbers. Even Maria had abandoned any pretense of normal service and was watching the confrontation with the tense alertness of someone preparing to call the police, or the morgue. Sophia found herself moving closer to their table, her server's instincts overriding her common sense. She should be backing away from the violence that was about to explode, should be protecting herself from the collision between Tony's stupidity and Vincent's fury. Instead, she was positioning herself where she could shield Marco from whatever was about to happen. "Vincent." She spoke his name quietly, but clearly enough to cut through the tension. "Marco needs you." Vincent's attention shifted to her for a fraction of a second, and Sophia saw something flicker across his expression. Surprise that she had spoken, recognition of what she was trying to do, and something that might have been gratitude. But when he looked back at Tony, the deadly stillness returned. "You're right," Vincent said, his voice carrying across the restaurant with perfect clarity. "My son does need me. He needs me to make sure that people like you understand that there are consequences for their actions." Tony tried to take another step backward and found himself pressed against the bar, trapped between Vincent's advancing form and the solid oak that had served generations of Marcello's customers. His breathing had become rapid and shallow, the kind of hyperventilation that preceded either fainting or fighting. "Please," Tony said, and the word came out as barely more than a croak. "I'm sorry. I'll leave. I won't come back. "You'll what?" Vincent asked, moving close enough that Tony would be able to see every detail of his expression. "You'll learn to treat children with respect. You'll think twice before terrorizing innocent families. You'll develop the basic human decency you should have been taught before you were old enough to order alcohol." Sophia could see the exact moment when Tony's fear transformed into desperate aggression. Cornered animals fought back, and Tony Breslin was very definitely cornered. His hands clenched into fists, his shoulders squared, and his bloodshot eyes took on the wild look of someone who had decided that violence was his only remaining option. "You think you scare me?" Tony snarled, his voice rising back to its earlier volume. "You think because you got money and fancy clothes that you can push people around? I ain't afraid of you, rich boy. I've been in fights before. He swung at Vincent with the clumsy telegraph of someone whose coordination had been compromised by alcohol and adrenaline. It was exactly the kind of mistake that Vincent had been waiting for, the legal justification for whatever response he chose to deliver. Vincent caught Tony's wrist with casual ease, his grip iron-strong and precise. Tony's punch never came close to landing, and suddenly he found himself immobilized by someone who moved with the fluid confidence of a predator taking down prey. "You've been in fights before," Vincent repeated, his tone conversational despite the violence implicit in his grip. "Have you ever been in a fight with someone who kills people for a living?" The question hung in the air like smoke from a gun barrel. Sophia felt her blood turn to ice water. She had known, intellectually, what Vincent Torino's reputation encompassed. The newspapers were full of speculation about his business practices, the federal investigations that never quite resulted in convictions, the rivals who disappeared and were never found. But hearing him acknowledge his capacity for lethal violence so casually, so matter-of-factly, made her realize how far removed she was from her ordinary world. Tony's face had gone white beneath his flush of alcohol and exertion. "You're crazy," he whispered. "You can't just— There are witnesses. There are—" "There are what?" Vincent asked, applying just enough pressure to Tony's wrist to make him wince. "People who saw you assault me first. People who watched you terrorize a 6-year-old child. People who will testify that I defended my family against a violent drunk." Sophia looked around the restaurant and realized that Vincent was absolutely right. Every witness would describe the same sequence of events. Tony had been the aggressor, Vincent had been protecting his son, and any violence that followed would be legally justifiable self-defense. The law would be on Vincent's side, the witnesses would be on Vincent's side, and Tony Breslin would be whatever Vincent decided he should be. "Please," Tony begged, all his earlier bravado evaporating in the face of imminent consequences. "I have kids of my own, a daughter. She's only 8 years old. She needs her father." Vincent's grip on Tony's wrist tightened fractionally. "Then maybe you should have thought about that before you decided to terrorize someone else's child." Sophia watched Marco through all of this, saw how the boy pressed his face against the booth's upholstery to avoid seeing the confrontation. His small shoulders shook with silent sobs, and she could hear him whispering words that sounded like "Mama, mama, mama," in a voice too quiet for anyone else to catch. The sight broke something inside her chest. "Vincent," she said again, louder this time, "Marco is scared." Vincent's attention flickered toward his son, and Sophia saw the exact moment when paternal love warred with predatory instinct. Marco's terror was visible in every line of his small body, and Vincent was forced to confront the fact that his response to Tony's aggression was traumatizing his son as much as Tony's initial behavior had. "You're right," Vincent said quietly. Then, to Tony, "You have 10 seconds to walk out that door. If I ever see you again, if I ever hear that you've bothered my family or anyone else's family, if you so much as look at this restaurant from across the street, I will make you disappear in ways that will leave your 8-year-old daughter wondering for the rest of her life what happened to her father." Vincent released Tony's wrist with a motion that sent the other man stumbling toward the door. Tony didn't look back, didn't stop to collect his dignity or offer any final threats. He fled into the night like a man running from his own execution, leaving behind only the smell of whiskey and fear. The restaurant fell into absolute silence. Sophia moved immediately to Marco's side, sliding into the booth and gathering the trembling boy into her arms without asking permission. Marco clung to her with the desperate strength of someone who had been drowning and suddenly found solid ground. "It's okay," she whispered into his hair, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her system. "The scary man is gone. You're safe now. Your papa made sure you're safe." Vincent stood frozen beside their table, his hands trembling slightly as the violence ebbed from his system, and left behind only the realization of what his son had witnessed. He had protected Marco from physical harm, but he had done so in a way that exposed the child to the terrifying reality of who his father really was. "I'm sorry," Vincent said, his voice cracking slightly. "Marco, I'm sorry you had to see that." Marco lifted his head from Sophia's shoulder, tears streaming down his cheeks, but his voice stronger than it had been all evening. "Papa, I was scared, but Sophia made it better. She made me feel safe." Vincent's eyes met Sophia's over his son's head, and in that moment she saw something she hadn't expected: vulnerability, gratitude, and a desperate hope that maybe, just maybe, he had found someone who could give his son what he couldn't provide himself. "Thank you," Vincent said quietly, "for protecting him." Sophia tightened her arms around Marco, feeling the boy's heartbeat gradually slow against her chest. "Someone had to," she replied. Outside, thunder rolled across the city like an echo of the storm that had just passed through Marcello's dining room. But inside, in the quiet aftermath of violence averted, Sophia held a traumatized child and began to understand that her life was about to change in ways she couldn't yet imagine. The question was no longer whether Vincent Torino would offer her a job. The question was whether she was brave enough to accept the world that came with it. The aftermath of violence hung in the air like smoke, invisible but unmistakable. Sophia held Marco against her chest, feeling his small body gradually relax as his sobs quieted to occasional hiccups. The boy's grip on her uniform had loosened, but he hadn't pulled away, finding in her embrace the safety that had been shattered by Tony's drunken aggression. Vincent remained standing beside their booth, his hands no longer trembling, but his face etched with something Sophia had never seen before: Regret, perhaps. Or the recognition that protecting his son sometimes meant exposing him to truths that no 6-year-old should have to understand. The restaurant around them had begun to return to some semblance of normalcy. Maria moved between tables, quietly reassuring the remaining customers and subtly encouraging those who seemed too shaken to finish their meals. The elderly woman at table 9 had decided to leave, gathering her purse with shaking hands while avoiding eye contact with anyone involved in the confrontation. The young man with his phone had finally put it away, apparently deciding that whatever emergency services he might have called were no longer necessary. Luigi and Anthony, Vincent's bodyguards, had resumed their positions but remained visibly alert. They understood, as Sophia was beginning to, that what had just transpired was only the opening movement of a much larger symphony. Men like Tony Breslin didn't simply disappear into the night and forget about their humiliation. They nursed grudges, told stories to their friends, and sometimes made decisions that escalated minor conflicts into blood feuds. "Papa," Marco whispered, his voice muffled against Sophia's shoulder, "I want to go home." Vincent's expression softened as he looked at his son. "Of course, Marco, we'll go right now." But when Vincent reached for the boy, Marco's arms tightened around Sophia's neck. "Can Sophia come with us? I don't want her to stay here with the scary man." "The scary man is gone, sweetheart," Sophia said gently, though she made no move to extract herself from Marco's embrace. "He won't be coming back." "How do you know?" Marco asked with the logical persistence of childhood. "What if he's waiting outside? What if he comes back when you're walking home?" Sophia felt Vincent's gaze on her face, measuring her response to his son's concern. There was something in his expression that suggested Marco's worry wasn't entirely unfounded. Men like Tony didn't always accept defeat gracefully, and Sophia had made herself a target by intervening in the confrontation. "Marco's right," Vincent said quietly. "It's not safe for you to walk home alone tonight." Sophia looked up at him, seeing not the predator who had been prepared to destroy Tony Breslin, but the father who was worried about collateral damage from his own reputation. "I'll be fine. I only live 6 blocks away, and I've walked home from late shifts before." "Not after what happened tonight." Vincent's tone carried the finality of someone making a decision that wouldn't be argued with. "Luigi will drive you home. Anthony will check your building, make sure there are no unpleasant surprises waiting for you." The offer was practical, even necessary given the circumstances. But Sophia understood that accepting Vincent's protection would be another step away from her ordinary life and deeper into his complicated world. Once she allowed his people to know where she lived, to involve themselves in her safety, she would be acknowledging a connection that went beyond a single evening service. "That's very kind," she began, preparing to decline as politely as possible. "Sophia," Marco said, lifting his head to look at her with eyes that were still bright with unshed tears. "Please don't let the scary man hurt you. You saved me. I want to save you too." The words hit Sophia like a physical blow. This child, who had just watched his father threaten to kill someone, was worried about her safety. He was offering protection with the same instinctive generosity that had made her kneel beside his table to compliment his toy car. "Okay," Sophia said, surprising herself with the decision. "I'll let your papa's friends drive me home." Marco's smile was like sunrise after a thunderstorm, transforming his tear-stained face into something luminous with relief. "Good. Papa, can we make sure Sophia gets home safe every night, until the scary man forgets about being mad?" Vincent's eyes met Sophia's again, and she saw him weighing possibilities and consequences with the calculating precision of someone who had built an empire on understanding human nature. "We'll see, Marco. It depends on what Sophia decides to do." The statement hung between them, loaded with implications that Sophia was only beginning to understand. Vincent wasn't just offering her protection from Tony Breslin's potential retaliation. He was offering her a choice between returning to her invisible life as a waitress or accepting the job that would change everything. "I should get back to work," Sophia said, though the words felt strange in her mouth. The restaurant seemed different now, smaller somehow, as if the confrontation had revealed the limitations of the ordinary world she had been inhabiting. "Sophia stays with me," Marco announced with the absolute authority that children sometimes wielded when adults had failed to provide adequate security. "Until we go home, then she goes to her home safe." Vincent looked as if he might argue, then seemed to realize that his son had already made the decision for all of them. "All right, Sophia can stay with us until we're ready to leave." Sophia found herself sliding back into the booth, Marco still nestled against her side as if she were an anchor in a world that had revealed itself to be far more dangerous than he had previously understood. Vincent sat across from them, his attention divided between his son and the subtle surveillance of the restaurant that had become second nature after years of living as both protector and target. "Are you hurt anywhere?" Sophia asked Marco, running gentle fingers through his dark hair. "Did the scary man touch you?" "No," Marco said, his voice stronger now that he was surrounded by people he trusted. "Papa didn't let him, and you got in front of him so he couldn't reach me." Sophia felt Vincent's gaze on her face again, studying her with an intensity that made her suddenly self-conscious. She had acted on instinct, positioning herself between Marco and potential harm, without consciously deciding to do so. But Vincent was analysing that instinct, measuring it against whatever criteria he used to evaluate the people he allowed into his son's life. "You have good instincts," Vincent said quietly. "Most people freeze when they see violence coming. You move toward it." "I move toward Marco," Sophia corrected. "There's a difference." "Is there?" Vincent asked, and something in his tone suggested that the distinction mattered more than Sophia realised. Maria appeared at their table carrying a tray with hot chocolate for Marco and coffee for Vincent and Sophia. "On the house," she said firmly, as if daring anyone to argue. "After what you all went through tonight." "Thank you, Maria," Vincent said, accepting the coffee with the same courtesy he might show to anyone. "I'm sorry about the disturbance." Maria waved away his apology with the gesture of someone who had seen worse things in her 32 years of restaurant ownership. Men like that are a plague. They drink too much, they get angry at the world, and they take it out on innocent people. You did nothing wrong by protecting your family. She paused, her weathered hand resting briefly on Sophia's shoulder. "And you, cara mia, you showed courage tonight. Not everyone would step between a drunk man and a frightened child." As Maria walked away, Sophia sipped her coffee and tried to process the evening's events. The confrontation with Tony had lasted only minutes, but it had revealed truths about herself that she hadn't known existed. She was braver than she had thought, she was more protective than she had realised, and she was apparently willing to involve herself in dangerous situations when children were threatened. "Sophia," Marco said, his voice carrying the sleepy contentment of someone who felt safe again. "Will you teach me the napkin trick tomorrow?" "I work tomorrow night," Sophia said automatically, then caught herself. Did she still work at Marcello's? Would Maria want to keep an employee who had become entangled with Vincent Torino's world? Would Sophia want to return to serving tables and clearing plates after what she had experienced tonight? "Maybe you won't be working tomorrow night," Vincent said, his voice carefully neutral. "Maybe you'll be starting a different job." Marco perked up with interest. "What job, Papa?" "A job taking care of you," Vincent replied, his eyes never leaving Sophia's face. "If Sophia decides she wants it." Sophia felt the weight of that decision settling on her shoulders like a lead blanket. She had defended Vincent's son against a violent drunk, had allowed herself to be drawn into their world through compassion and protective instinct. Now Vincent was asking her to make that involvement permanent, to trade her ordinary life for whatever complex reality came with caring for a Mafia boss's grieving child. "I would get to see Sophia every day?" Marco asked, his excitement building despite his exhaustion. Every day," Vincent confirmed. "She would live with us. Take care of you when I have to work, make sure you're safe and happy and learning everything you need to learn." "Like a new mama." Marco's question was innocent, but Sophia felt it hit Vincent like a physical blow. The boy was too young to understand the implications of what he was asking, but old enough to recognize that he needed someone who could provide the maternal care that had been ripped from his life. "Like a very good friend who wants to take care of you," Sophia said carefully, not wanting to promise more than she could deliver or usurp Elena's irreplaceable role in Marco's life. Marco considered this with the serious concentration he brought to important decisions. "I would like that," he announced finally. "I would like it very much." Vincent's smile was small but genuine, the first completely unguarded expression Sophia had seen from him all evening. "Then it's settled. Sophia, you start Monday morning. Luigi will pick you up at 8 o'clock. "Wait," Sophia said, her practical mind finally catching up with the emotional momentum of the moment. "We haven't talked about salary or responsibilities or—" "We'll talk about everything tomorrow," Vincent interrupted gently. "Tonight, we just need to get everyone home safely." As if summoned by his words, Luigi appeared at their table. Up close, he was smaller than Sophia had expected, with grey hair and kind eyes that seemed inconsistent with his role as a bodyguard. But there was something in his stillness that reminded her of Vincent's predatory patience. "Car's ready, boss," Luigi said quietly. "Street's clear." Vincent helped Marco out of the booth, the boy moving with the loose coordination of someone fighting exhaustion. Sophia gathered her purse and jacket, suddenly aware that she was about to cross a threshold from which there might be no return. "Sophia," Marco said, reaching for her hand as they walked toward the door, "I'm glad you're going to take care of me." "I'm glad too, sweetheart," Sophia replied, and realized with some surprise that she meant it. Outside, the rain had started again, soft and steady against the restaurant's windows. Vincent's town car waited at the curb, gleaming black paint reflecting the streetlights like a mirror. Sophia had never ridden in a car that expensive, had never been protected by armed bodyguards, had never made a decision that felt quite so much like jumping off a cliff. But as Marco squeezed her hand and smiled up at her with complete trust, Sophia realized that some cliffs were worth jumping from, especially when there was someone worth catching at the bottom. Tony Breslin's return to Marcello's came 47 minutes after he had fled into the rain-soaked night, and this time he wasn't alone. Sophia was in the kitchen helping Maria wash the last of the evening's dishes when she heard the commotion in the dining room. Raised voices, the scrape of chair legs against tile, and underneath it all, a sound she recognized with chilling clarity, the particular kind of laughter that came from men who had been drinking and feeding off each other's anger. "Stay here," Maria whispered, her weathered hands stilling on the plate she had been drying. But Sophia was already moving toward the swinging doors, drawn by an instinct she couldn't name and probably shouldn't trust. Through the kitchen's service window, she could see Tony standing near the front entrance with 3 other men. They were all cut from the same mould, construction workers or labourers, broad-shouldered and thick-armed, wearing the kind of casual aggression that came from lives spent in physical confrontation. One carried a tire iron, another had what looked like a length of chain wrapped around his knuckles. Vincent was still seated in the corner booth with Marco, but his posture had changed completely. Gone was the relaxed father enjoying a quiet dinner with his son. In his place sat something that reminded Sophia of a coiled spring, all potential energy and deadly focus. Marco seemed to sense the shift in his father's demeanour and had pressed himself against Vincent's side, small hands clutching his toy car with white knuckles. "Thought you could embarrass me in front of all these people?" Tony's voice carried clearly across the now empty dining room. The handful of customers who had remained after the earlier confrontation had melted away the moment Tony and his friends appeared, leaving behind half-finished meals and hastily abandoned wine glasses. "Thought you could threaten me and I'd just slink away like some scared dog?" Vincent's response was so quiet that Sophia had to strain to hear it. "I thought you had learned something about consequences. Apparently, I was wrong." Sophia watched Luigi and Anthony move with practiced precision, positioning themselves to control the room's exits while maintaining the appearance of casual alertness. These men had done this before, had faced down multiple attackers in confined spaces where innocent bystanders could become casualties. Their movements were economical, professional, and absolutely terrifying in their implications. "Big man with your bodyguards and your fancy suit," Tony continued, emboldened by his numerical advantage and whatever courage he had found at the bottom of several more bottles. "Let's see how tough you are when the odds ain't quite so stacked in your favour." Marco whimpered softly, a sound that cut through Sophia's chest like a blade. The boy was reliving his trauma from earlier in the evening, watching his safe space transform once again into a battlefield where his father might have to become the predator that lived beneath his protective exterior. Sophia made her decision without conscious thought. She pushed through the kitchen doors and walked directly toward Tony and his friends, carrying herself with the same professional composure that had served her through 18 months of difficult customers and impossible situations. 4 drunk, angry men with improvised weapons turned their attention toward her, and Sophia felt fear lance through her nervous system like electricity. But Marco was crying. Vincent was trapped between his need to protect his son and his need to neutralize the threat, and Sophia had already proven earlier that evening that she was willing to put herself between danger and the people she cared about. "Excuse me," she said, her voice steady despite the hammering of her heart. "I think there's been a misunderstanding." Tony's friends looked confused by her approach, their alcohol-fueled aggression momentarily derailed by the appearance of someone who should have been cowering in the kitchen. The man with the tire iron actually took a step backward, uncertain how to respond to polite interruption in the middle of their planned intimidation. "No misunderstanding, lady," Tony snarled, though his eyes had already moved past her to focus on Vincent. "Just some unfinished business with Mr. Moneybags over there." "I understand you're upset," Sophia continued, positioning herself between the armed men and the corner booth where Marco sat terrified in his father's arms. "But there's a child here, a 6-year-old boy who's already been frightened enough tonight." "Should have thought about that before his daddy decided to play tough guy," the man with the chain said, taking a menacing step toward Sophia. "Maybe Junior needs to learn what happens when people don't show proper respect." The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Sophia had positioned herself perfectly to shield Marco from the confrontation, but that same positioning put her directly in the path of violence that was about to explode. She could feel Vincent's deadly attention focusing on the man who had just threatened his son, could sense the moment when paternal protection would override every other consideration. "Please," Sophia said, though she wasn't entirely sure who she was addressing. "This doesn't have to happen, not in front of Marco." "Marco?" Tony's laugh was ugly and bitter. "Pretty little rich boy has a name. Well, Marco can watch his daddy get what's coming to him. Maybe it'll teach him some humility." Tony raised his hand, and Sophia saw the flash of steel. A knife, probably pulled from his work belt, the kind of utility blade that construction workers carried for cutting rope and opening packages. But knives could cut more than rope, and Tony was moving toward Vincent's table with the unsteady determination of someone who had passed beyond reason into pure, vindictive rage. Sophia didn't think. She reacted. She grabbed the wine bottle from the nearest abandoned table and swung it at Tony's knife hand, her movement powered by desperation and protective fury. The bottle connected with his wrist in a spray of Chianti and broken glass, sending the knife skittering across the tile floor and drawing a roar of pain and surprise from Tony's throat. "You bitch!" Tony spun toward her, his face twisted with rage and alcohol, blood flowing from the cuts where glass had bitten into his skin. "You fucking—" His backhanded blow caught Sophia across the left side of her face, with the full force of his construction worker strength behind it. The impact sent her stumbling backward, her vision exploding into stars and her ears ringing with the sound of her own blood rushing. She tasted copper and salt, felt warmth flowing from her split lip down her chin. But she stayed between Tony and Marco, Even as pain lanced through her skull and her balance wavered, even as Tony's friends closed in with their improvised weapons raised, Sophia planted her feet and kept her body positioned as a shield between the violence and the terrified child behind her. "Sophia!" Marco's scream pierced the restaurant's chaos, high and desperate and filled with the particular terror of a child watching someone he loved being hurt. That scream released something in Vincent that Sophia had only glimpsed earlier in the evening. Vincent Torino rose from the booth with the fluid grace of a predator finally unleashed. His movement was so quick, so controlled, that he seemed to simply materialize behind the man with the tire iron. Sophia saw a brief struggle, heard the wet sound of something breaking, and then the tire iron clattered to the floor beside its former owner, who was suddenly, impossibly, no longer conscious. The man with the chain had enough time to register what had happened to his friend before Luigi appeared at his shoulder. Luigi, who had seemed like such a kindly grandfather figure, moved with the mechanical precision of someone who had spent decades solving problems that required violence. The chain joined the tire iron on the floor, and its owner joined his unconscious friend. Tony and his remaining companion found themselves facing Vincent across the restaurant's scattered tables and broken glass, their numerical advantage evaporated and their courage rapidly following suit. "You wanted to finish our business," Vincent said, his voice carrying the kind of casual menace that made Sophia's skin crawl. "Let's finish it." Tony looked around desperately, searching for weapons or escape routes or some miracle that would extract him from the consequences of his own stupidity. Instead, he found Sophia, blood streaming from her split lip, standing defiantly between him and his intended target, despite having just taken a blow that would have dropped most people. "She's hurt," Marco sobbed from the booth, his voice breaking with anguish. "Tony hurt Sophia." Vincent's eyes moved to Sophia's bleeding face, and something terrible flickered across his expression. Not anger. Anger was too small a word for what Sophia saw there. This was wrath, pure and biblical and absolutely implacable. "You hit her," Vincent said, each word precisely enunciated. "You drew blood from someone who was trying to protect a child." Tony's remaining courage crumbled in the face of Vincent's cold fury. "She hit me first. She disarmed you to protect my son." Vincent took a step closer, and Tony instinctively backed away. "You came here with weapons. You threatened a 6-year-old boy. You struck an unarmed woman who was shielding a child from violence." Sophia watched this confrontation through a haze of pain and adrenaline, her head throbbing and her vision slightly doubled. But she could see clearly enough to recognise that Tony Breslin had finally, catastrophically, chosen the wrong target for his anger. Vincent didn't carry weapons. He didn't need to. His hands were weapons enough, trained and strengthened by years of necessity and violence. When he moved toward Tony, it was with the terrible patience of someone who had all the time in the world to deliver justice. Tony tried to run. He made it 3 steps before Vincent caught him, spinning him around with casual ease and delivering a single, precisely calculated blow that sent Tony crashing into the nearest table. Plates and glasses exploded in a shower of ceramic and crystal, and Tony lay still among the wreckage. The restaurant fell into absolute silence. Sophia sagged against the wall, her adrenaline fading and leaving behind waves of pain and exhaustion. Her face throbbed where Tony had struck her, and she could feel blood continuing to seep from her split lip. But Marco was safe. Vincent was safe. The threat had been neutralized. "Sophia," Vincent said, appearing suddenly at her side. "Let me see." His fingers were gentle against her face, tilting her chin to examine the damage in the restaurant's warm lighting. Up close, Sophia could see that his eyes held no trace of the predator who had just disabled 4 armed men with clinical efficiency. Instead, she saw only concern and something that might have been guilt. "I'm okay," Sophia managed, though her voice came out thick and slightly slurred. "Just a split lip." "Just a split lip," Vincent repeated, his tone carrying bitter self-recrimination. "You took a blow meant for me. You put yourself between armed men and my son. You—" "Papa," Marco interrupted, appearing at Vincent's side with tears streaming down his face. "Is Sophia going to be okay? Is she going to leave us?" Sophia looked down at the terrified little boy and felt something shift in her chest, some final resistance crumbling in the face of his desperate need for reassurance. "I'm not going anywhere, sweetheart," she said, kneeling to his level despite the way the movement made her head spin. "It takes more than one drunk man to scare me away." Marco threw his arms around her neck, holding her with the desperate strength of someone who had already lost one person he loved and couldn't bear to lose another. Sophia held him back, tasting blood and breathing in the scent of his shampoo, and realized that she had just crossed a line from which there would be no return. She wasn't just accepting a job anymore, she was accepting a family, and all the danger that came with protecting it. The silence that followed violence was different from ordinary quiet. It had weight, substance, the particular density that came from lives forever altered in the span of heartbeats. Sophia knelt on Marcello's tile floor, holding Marco against her chest, while blood from her split lip dripped onto his dark hair. Around them, the restaurant looked like a war zone. Overturned tables, broken glass, 4 unconscious men scattered among the wreckage like discarded mannequins. Vincent stood over Tony Breslin's motionless form, his expensive suit unmarked despite having just disabled 4 armed attackers with clinical precision. His hands hung loose at his sides, no longer trembling with adrenaline, and when he turned to look at Sophia and Marco, his expression held something she had never seen before: recognition. Not just gratitude for protecting his son, but the deeper acknowledgement that comes when someone reveals their true nature under pressure. Sophia had thrown herself between Marco and armed men without hesitation, had taken a blow that could have shattered bone, had stayed standing when most people would have fallen. Vincent was looking at her as if he were seeing her clearly for the first time. "We need to leave," Vincent said quietly. "Now." Luigi was already moving, checking the unconscious men for serious injuries while Anthony swept broken glass away from their path to the door. They worked with the efficient coordination of people who had cleaned up after violence before, who understood that the aftermath was often more dangerous than the confrontation itself. "What about them?" Sophia asked, nodding toward Tony and his friends. Her voice came out thick and slightly slurred, her lips swelling enough to affect her speech. "They'll wake up with headaches and criminal assault charges," Vincent replied. "Maria has security cameras. The police will have all the evidence they need to establish who the aggressors were." Sophia felt Marco stir against her shoulder, lifting his head to look around the destroyed restaurant with eyes that seemed too old for his 6-year-old face. "Papa, did you kill the bad men?" "No, son, they're just sleeping." Vincent's voice carried the gentle patience he reserved for his child's questions, though Sophia could see the tension in his shoulders as he calculated how long they had before Tony or his friends regained consciousness. "But we can't stay here anymore. It's not safe." Marco nodded with the solemn understanding of someone who had learned too young that safety was fragile and temporary. "Because they might wake up angry?" "Because they might wake up stupid," Sophia said, surprising herself with the attempt at humour despite her throbbing face. "And we've already seen how dangerous that can be." Marco's giggle was small but genuine, a sound that seemed to release some of the terrible tension that had been building in Vincent's expression. His son was still capable of finding joy, still able to laugh in the aftermath of violence. That resilience was precious beyond measure. "Can you stand?" Vincent asked Sophia, extending his hand to help her to her feet. Sophia accepted his assistance, grateful for the support as waves of dizziness washed over her. The blow to her face had been harder than she had initially realized, and the adrenaline that had carried her through the confrontation was leaving behind a bone-deep exhaustion that made every movement feel deliberate. "I'm okay," she said, though Vincent's steadying hand on her elbow suggested that her definition of okay might need adjustment. "You're concussed," Vincent said with clinical certainty. "Possibly other injuries we can't see yet. You need medical attention." I need to go home and put ice on my face, Sophia countered, though she made no move to pull away from his support. I've been hurt worse falling downstairs. Vincent's expression darkened at her casual dismissal of her own welfare. When? When were you hurt worse than this? The question caught Sophia off guard, partly because of Vincent's obvious concern, and partly because she realised she had just revealed something about her past that she usually kept hidden. The years before Marcello's hadn't been easy ones, filled with cheap apartments in dangerous neighbourhoods and jobs that sometimes put her in contact with people who solved disagreements with their fists. It doesn't matter, Sophia said quickly. That was before. This is now. But Vincent was studying her face with the same intensity he had brought to evaluating Tony's threat, cataloguing details that most people would miss. The faint scar along her temple, the way she had moved with practiced efficiency during the confrontation, her complete lack of surprise at being struck by a violent drunk. "You've done this before," Vincent said, his voice carrying the certainty of someone who recognised a fellow survivor. Positioned yourself between danger and someone who needed protection. Sophia felt Marco's arms tighten around her waist, his small body pressed against her side as if he could anchor her to safety through proximity alone. The boy was listening to every word, trying to understand the adult complexities that shaped his world. "Haven't we all?" Sophia deflected, but Vincent's expression told her that the deflection hadn't worked. "No," Vincent said quietly. "Most people run from violence. Most people protect themselves first and worry about others later. You did the opposite." Maria appeared from the kitchen, carrying a clean dish rag and a bowl of ice water, her weathered face set in lines of grim determination. "Sit," she commanded Sophia, gesturing toward one of the few chairs that hadn't been overturned in the fight. "Let me clean that cut before it gets infected." Sophia allowed herself to be guided to the chair, Marco maintaining his protective hold on her hand while Maria dabbed at the blood with gentle efficiency. The older woman had seen her share of violence over the years, had learned basic first aid out of necessity rather than training. "You were very brave tonight," Maria said quietly, her voice pitched low enough that only Sophia could hear. "Very stupid, but very brave." "I couldn't let him hurt Marco," Sophia replied, wincing as Maria's ministrations found particularly tender areas around her split lip. "I know, Cara. That's what made it brave instead of just stupid." Maria's eyes moved meaningfully toward Vincent, who was speaking in rapid, low-voiced Italian to Luigi, while keeping one eye on Sophia's treatment. "He knows it too. Vincent Torino doesn't forget people who protect what he loves." The implications of Maria's words settled over Sophia like a weighted blanket. Vincent's gratitude wasn't just personal, it was professional. In his world, loyalty was the rarest currency, and Sophia had just demonstrated the kind of absolute fidelity that most people only promised but never delivered. "There!" Maria announced, stepping back to examine her work. "The cut isn't deep, but you'll have a bruise that would make a prize-fighter jealous. Ice will help with the swelling." Sophia accepted the ice pack gratefully, pressing it against her throbbing cheek and feeling immediate relief from the cold. Marco had climbed into the chair beside her, his toy car clutched in one hand while the other maintained contact with her arm, as if physical touch could prevent her from disappearing the way his mother had. "Sophia," Vincent said, approaching their improvised medical station with careful steps, "I want you to understand something." She looked up at him, noting how the restaurant's warm lighting caught the silver threads in his dark hair and emphasized the lines of strain around his eyes. This evening had aged him, she realized. The confrontation with Tony had forced him to reveal aspects of his nature that he usually kept hidden from his son. "Tonight changed things," Vincent continued, "not just for Marco, not just for you, but for everyone connected to this situation. Tony Breslin and his friends won't forget what happened here. They won't forget that they were humiliated by people they consider inferior." Sophia nodded, understanding the implications even through her concussion-hazed thinking. "They'll want revenge." They'll want to prove that their humiliation was temporary, Vincent corrected. That they can still hurt the people who made them look weak. You made yourself a target when you disarmed Tony. You became an enemy when you protected Marco. Marco looked between Sophia and his father with growing anxiety, his small face creasing with the effort of understanding adult complexities that no child should have to process. Does that mean Sophia can't live with us because of the bad men? Vincent's expression softened as he looked at his son. It means Sophia needs to live with us, for her own protection as much as yours. The weight of that statement settled over Sophia like a physical presence. Vincent wasn't just offering her a job anymore, he was offering her sanctuary, protection from the consequences of her own heroism. But that protection came with a price that she was only beginning to understand. "I can take care of myself," Sophia said, though the words lacked conviction even to her own ears. "Can you?" Vincent asked, his tone gentle but implacable. "Can you take care of yourself against 4 men with weapons? Can you protect yourself from people who know where you live, where you work, who your friends are? Can you defend yourself against the kind of resources that angry, humiliated men sometimes acquire when they want revenge?" Sophia felt the truth of his words settling into her bones like winter cold. She had acted on instinct, protecting a child without considering the broader implications of her intervention. Now she was discovering that heroism came with consequences that extended far beyond the immediate moment. "What are you asking me to do?" Sophia said quietly. "I'm asking you to let me protect you the way you protected my son," Vincent replied. "I'm asking you to trust me with your safety the way Marco trusted you with his." Sophia looked down at Marco, who was watching her with eyes that held too much hope for someone so young. He had already lost his mother to violence and circumstance. The possibility of losing Sophia to the consequences of her own courage was written across his small features in lines of barely controlled panic. "Okay," Sophia said, the word coming out smaller than she had intended. "Okay, I'll stay with you." Marco's smile was like sunrise after the longest night, transforming his tear-stained face into something luminous with relief and joy. "Really? You'll really stay with us forever?" "For as long as you need me," Sophia promised, though she suspected that forever might be a more accurate timeline than either she or Vincent was willing to acknowledge. Vincent's expression held something that Sophia couldn't quite identify. Gratitude, certainly. Relief that his son would have the maternal figure he desperately needed. But underneath those emotions was something deeper, more complex. Recognition of a debt that could never be fully repaid. Acknowledgement of a connection that went beyond employer and employee, protector and protected. "Luigi will take you home to pack," Vincent said. "Bring whatever you need for the next few weeks. Everything else can be arranged later." Sophia nodded, suddenly overwhelmed by the magnitude of the change that was about to reshape her life. This morning she had been an invisible waitress living paycheck to paycheck in a studio apartment. Tonight she was about to become part of a family that existed at the dangerous intersection of wealth and violence. But Marco's hand was warm in hers, and Vincent's promise of protection felt more solid than any security she had ever known. Sometimes the most dangerous choice was also the only choice worth making. "Come on, sweetheart," Sophia said to Marco, rising carefully from her chair. "Let's go see your new home." As they walked toward the door, stepping carefully around the broken glass and unconscious men, Sophia caught sight of her reflection in the restaurant's front window. Her face was swollen and bruised, her uniform stained with blood, her hair dishevelled from the evening's violence. But her eyes were clear, determined, and completely unafraid. She wasn't invisible anymore. She never would be again. The drive to Vincent's mansion passed in a cocoon of leather seats and bulletproof glass, the city's neon-lit streets blurring past like scenes from someone else's life. Sophia sat between Vincent and Marco in the back of the armoured town car, her swollen face throbbing in rhythm with her heartbeat while Marco dozed against her shoulder, finally succumbing to the exhaustion that followed terror. Vincent spoke quietly into his phone. his voice carrying the controlled authority of someone managing the aftermath of violence. "Clean it up," he said to whoever was on the other end. "Make sure the police understand that this was self-defense. Make sure Tony Breslin understands that his next mistake will be his last." Sophia listened to him orchestrate the evening's consequences with the same methodical precision that other men might bring to planning a dinner party. This was Vincent's world, a place where violence had ripple effects that needed to be managed, where enemies made in moments of stupidity could become threats that lasted for years. "How are you feeling?" Vincent asked after ending his call, his attention focusing entirely on Sophia's battered face. "Like I got hit by a construction worker with anger management issues," Sophia replied, attempting lightness despite the waves of pain radiating from her cheek. "But I've felt worse." Vincent's expression darkened at her casual dismissal of her injuries. "You keep saying that. You keep mentioning other times you've been hurt. I want to know about those times." Sophia felt Marco stir against her shoulder, the boy's sleep light enough that their conversation might wake him. "Not now," she said quietly. "Not in front of him." Vincent nodded, understanding her concern for his son's peace of mind, but his eyes held the promise that this conversation wasn't finished. He wanted to understand the woman who had thrown herself between his child and armed men. Wanted to know what experiences had shaped someone capable of such selfless courage. The mansion appeared gradually through the trees that lined Vincent's private drive, a sprawling Mediterranean-style estate that spoke of generational wealth and carefully maintained power. Security lights illuminated manicured gardens and fountains that probably cost more than Sophia's annual salary. It was beautiful in the way that only serious money could achieve, but there was something fortress-like about its perfection, as if beauty were secondary to protection. "Welcome home," Vincent said softly as they pulled through gates that closed behind them with a finality that made Sophia's chest tighten. Home. The word carried implications that Sophia wasn't ready to examine too closely. This wasn't her home. It was Vincent's, a sanctuary built on foundations that she was only beginning to understand. But Marco was stirring in her arms, blinking sleepily at the mansion's warm lights, and his small hand found hers with the instinctive trust of someone who had claimed her as family. "Is this where I live now?" Marco asked, his voice thick with sleep and confusion. "This is where we all live now," Vincent confirmed, helping his son out of the car while Sophia gathered her purse and the overnight bag that Luigi had helped her pack from her studio apartment. "Sophia's going to take care of you here, where it's safe." The mansion's interior was even more impressive than its exterior, marble floors that probably came from Italian quarries, artwork that belonged in museums, furniture that had been selected by people who understood the difference between expensive and priceless. But Sophia found herself focusing not on the luxury, but on the details that spoke of a child's presence: finger paintings held to the refrigerator with magnets, toy cars scattered on antique Persian rugs, a half-finished puzzle on a coffee table that probably cost more than her car. This was a home, not just a display of wealth. Vincent had built a place where his son could be a child, despite the dangerous realities that surrounded their lives. "Mrs. Chen will show you to your room," Vincent said, gesturing toward an elegant Asian woman who appeared from what Sophia assumed was the kitchen. "She manages the household, makes sure everything runs smoothly. If you need anything at all, she'll take care of it." Mrs. Chen approached with the quiet efficiency of someone accustomed to managing complex domestic situations. Her smile was warm but professional, and her eyes catalogued Sophia's injuries with the practical assessment of someone who had seen violence before. "Miss Sophia," Mrs. Chen said, her accent carrying the slight precision of someone who had learned English as a second language. "I have prepared the blue suite for you. It connects to Master Marco's room so you can hear him if he needs you during the night." Sophia felt something shift in her chest at the thoughtfulness of the arrangement. Vincent had planned for her comfort while ensuring she could fulfill her primary responsibility of caring for Marco. It was the kind of consideration that spoke of experience with complex family dynamics. "Thank you," Sophia said, suddenly aware of how she must look. Blood-stained uniform, swollen face, exhaustion written in every line of her body. "I'm sorry. I know I'm not exactly presentable right now." "You look like someone who protected a child, Mrs." Chen replied, with the matter-of-fact tone of someone stating an obvious truth. "That is always presentable in this house." Marco tugged on Sophia's hand, drawing her attention down to his upturned face. "Can I show you my room, and my cars, and the place where Papa reads me stories?" Despite her exhaustion and pain, Sophia felt herself smiling at his enthusiasm. "I would love to see everything, but maybe after I clean up a little. I think I might get blood on your toys." Marco's expression grew serious as he studied her swollen face. "Does it hurt very much?" "Not as much as it would hurt to see you scared," Sophia answered honestly. "Taking care of you is worth a little pain." Vincent was watching this exchange with an expression that Sophia couldn't quite read. There was gratitude there certainly, and relief that his son was responding so positively to her presence. But underneath those emotions was something more complex, recognition of a connection that went beyond professional obligation. "Marco, why don't you help Mrs. Chen get Sophia settled?" Vincent suggested. "I have some calls to make, but I'll come check on you both before bedtime." As they walked through the mansion's hallways, Marco, maintaining a running commentary on family photographs and favourite hiding spots, Sophia began to understand the magnitude of the life she was entering. This wasn't just wealth, it was power, carefully maintained and jealously guarded. The artwork on the walls included pieces she recognised from art history classes. The security system was more sophisticated than most banks, and the staff moved with the discreet efficiency of people who understood that their employer's business required absolute discretion. Her room was larger than her entire former apartment, decorated in shades of blue and cream that managed to be both elegant and comfortable. French doors opened onto a private balcony that overlooked gardens where Marco could play safely, and the connecting door to his room stood slightly ajar so she could hear him if he called out during the night. "This is beautiful," Sophia said, though the words felt inadequate for the luxury surrounding her. "Papa wanted you to be comfortable," Marco said, with the simple logic of childhood. "He said you're going to live with us forever, so you need a room that makes you happy." Forever? The word hung in the air between them, loaded with implications that Sophia wasn't ready to examine. She had accepted Vincent's offer out of necessity and compassion, but she hadn't truly considered what forever might mean in the context of their complicated lives. Mrs. Chen appeared with first aid supplies and a selection of clothes in Sophia's size, somehow acquired in the hour since Vincent had made his offer at the restaurant. The efficiency was both impressive and slightly unsettling, a reminder that Vincent's resources extended far beyond what most people could imagine. "I'll leave you to get settled," Mrs. Chen said diplomatically. "Dinner will be ready in an hour, whenever you feel ready to join us." After Mrs. Chen departed, Sophia found herself alone with Marco in a room that cost more to decorate than she had earned in the past 2 years. The boy settled himself on the bed's edge, swinging his legs and watching her with the intense focus that children brought to studying new situations. "Are you really going to stay?" Marco asked, his voice carrying the particular vulnerability that came from having lost one person he loved and fearing the loss of another. Sophia sat beside him on the bed, ignoring the way the movement made her head spin. "I'm really going to stay," she promised, "for as long as you need me. What if Papa has to go away for work? What if bad men come here? What if you get hurt worse than tonight?" Marco's questions tumbled out in the rapid-fire succession of childhood anxiety, each fear leading to the next in an endless chain of what-ifs. "Then I'll still be here," Sophia said firmly. "Your papa has made this house safe for both of us. Mrs. Chen and all the other people who work here are going to help take care of you, and I'm tougher than I look." Marco studied her swollen face with the clinical interest of someone assessing the truth of her claim. "You don't look very tough right now." Sophia laughed, the sound genuine despite her pain. Tough doesn't mean you don't get hurt, sweetheart. Tough means you get hurt and you keep going anyway. Like how you kept standing up even when the bad man hit you. Exactly like that. Marco nodded with the satisfied air of someone who had solved a complex puzzle. Then you're very tough, and Papa is very tough too, so we're all tough together. The toughest family in the whole city, Sophia agreed, surprised by how natural the word family felt when applied to their unusual situation. A soft knock at the door interrupted their conversation, and Vincent appeared carrying a tray with ice packs, pain medication, and what looked like professional-grade antiseptic. His expression held the careful neutrality of someone managing his own emotional response to seeing someone he cared about in pain. "How are you feeling?" he asked, setting the tray on the bedside table and examining Sophia's face with clinical attention. "Better?" Sophia said, though the throbbing in her cheek suggested otherwise. "The room is incredible, thank you." "You don't have to thank me for basic decency," Vincent replied, his tone carrying an edge that Sophia didn't understand. "You took a blow meant for my son. The least I can do is provide you with somewhere safe to recover." Marco looked between Sophia and his father with the heightened awareness that children developed when adults were discussing important things in carefully coded language. "Papa, are you mad at Sophia?" "No, son, I'm mad at myself." Vincent's honesty was surprising in its directness. "Sophia got hurt because I brought danger into her life. She's in pain because I failed to protect her the way she protected you." Sophia felt something shift in her understanding of Vincent's reaction to the evening's events. His careful control wasn't just about managing practical consequences. It was about guilt. He blamed himself for her injuries, for the circumstances that had put her in harm's way. "You didn't fail," Sophia said quietly. "You couldn't have known that Tony would come back with friends. You couldn't have prevented me from making my own choices." "Couldn't I?" Vincent asked, his eyes meeting hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. "I knew what kind of man Tony Breslin was the moment he opened his mouth. I knew he wouldn't accept humiliation gracefully. I should have ended the threat permanently when I had the chance." The casual way he spoke of permanent solutions sent a chill through Sophia's system, a reminder that Vincent's world operated by rules she was only beginning to understand. But Marco was listening to every word, absorbing lessons about power and protection that would shape his understanding of how the world worked. "You made the right choice," Sophia said firmly. "You protected Marco's innocence. You showed him that violence should be a last resort, not a first response. That's the kind of father he needs." Vincent's expression softened at her words, some of the tension leaving his shoulders. "And what kind of father figure does he need from you?" The question caught Sophia off guard, partly because of its implications and partly because she realized she already knew the answer. "Someone who will love him enough to take a hit for him. Someone who will teach him that protecting people you care about is worth any price." Marco had been following this conversation with the intense focus of someone trying to understand adult complexities that affected his world. Now he spoke up with the clarity that children sometimes brought to complicated situations. "I think Sophia should stay forever," he announced, "and I think Papa should make sure nobody ever hurts her again, because she's our family now." Vincent's eyes met Sophia's over his son's head, and in that moment she saw the exact instant when their arrangement shifted from professional necessity to something far more personal and permanent. "Forever it is," Vincent said quietly. And Sophia realized that somewhere between taking her first hit for this family and accepting her first sanctuary from them, she had stopped thinking of this as a job and started thinking of it as home. 3 weeks into her new life, Sophia had learned to recognize the sounds that meant Vincent was in danger. It started with the subtle shift in household rhythm that preceded his most important business meetings. Mrs. Chen moved through the mansion with heightened efficiency, ensuring that Marco was occupied with activities that would keep him safely entertained and far from the parts of the house where difficult conversations took place. The security team's radio chatter increased in frequency and intensity, and Vincent himself took on the particular stillness that Sophia had come to associate with predatory calculation. This Thursday morning carried all those warning signs and more. Sophia was in the kitchen, helping Marco construct an elaborate breakfast fort out of cereal boxes when Vincent appeared, dressed in a charcoal suit that cost more than most people's cars. But it was his expression that made Sophia's protective instincts sharpen to full alertness. He looked like a man preparing for war. "Good morning, Papa," Marco said cheerfully, not yet old enough to read the dangerous currents that adults navigated in their daily lives. "Sophia and I are building a castle for my cars to live in." Vincent's smile for his son was genuine but strained. "That sounds like an excellent project. Make sure Sophia helps you finish it before lunch." The careful phrasing sent a chill through Sophia's system. Not, "make sure you finish it," but "make sure Sophia helps you finish it." As if Vincent might not be there for lunch. As if he might not be there at all. "Vincent," Sophia said quietly, "can I speak with you for a moment?" They stepped into the hallway outside the kitchen, far enough from Marco's hearing but close enough that Sophia could respond if the boy needed her. Vincent's tension was visible in the set of his shoulders, the way his eyes kept moving to check sight lines and escape routes even within his own home. "What's happening today?" Sophia asked, though part of her wasn't sure she wanted to know the answer. "Business meeting," Vincent replied, his tone carrying the deliberate neutrality that he used when discussing the darker aspects of his work. "Nothing you need to worry about." "Don't." Sophia's voice carried more authority than she had intended, surprising them both. "Don't treat me like I'm too fragile to handle the truth. I've seen what your world looks like when it turns violent. I have the bruises to prove it." Vincent's expression shifted, recognition flickering across his features. Over the past 3 weeks, Sophia had proven herself capable of handling far more complexity than most people could manage. She had adapted to life in his mansion without losing her essential warmth, had managed Marco's nightmares and emotional needs with intuitive skill, and had demonstrated the kind of practical courage that couldn't be taught or faked. "There's been a problem with one of my business partners," Vincent said carefully. "A disagreement about territory and responsibilities. Today's meeting is meant to resolve that disagreement." Sophia felt ice forming in her stomach. "What kind of resolution?" "The permanent kind," Vincent replied, his voice carrying the flat finality that made Sophia's skin crawl. "Salvatore Coretti has been moving product through my territory without permission. He's been recruiting from my organization, and yesterday he made the mistake of threatening my family." The last part hit Sophia like a physical blow. "He threatened Marco?" "He threatened all of you." Vincent's eyes held the kind of cold fury that Sophia had seen only once before, in the restaurant, when Tony had called Marco a spoiled brat. "He sent word that my son would be safer in a boarding school somewhere far away, that my household staff might want to consider finding employment elsewhere, that certain recent additions to my family might discover that protection has its limits." Sophia understood immediately that the certain recent additions referred to her. Salvatore Coretti had identified her as Vincent's weakness, a vulnerability that could be exploited to gain leverage over the Torino organization. By caring about her, by bringing her into his home and under his protection, Vincent had given his enemies a target. "I'm endangering you," Sophia said, the realization hitting her with crushing weight. "My being here is making you vulnerable." "No." Vincent's response was immediate and absolute. "My enemies making threats is endangering them. There's a difference." But Sophia could see the calculation behind Vincent's fury, the strategic thinking that was trying to balance protecting his family against maintaining his position in a world that respected only strength. Salvatore Coretti had forced Vincent into an impossible choice: demonstrate weakness by negotiating with someone who had threatened his son, or demonstrate strength by eliminating that threat permanently. "What can I do to help?" Sophia asked, though she suspected that Vincent's answer wouldn't involve anything she was prepared to hear. "Keep Marco safe," Vincent replied. "Keep him occupied and happy, and far away from anything that might frighten him. If something goes wrong today, Luigi will take both of you somewhere secure until the situation is resolved." "And if something goes wrong with you?" Sophia's question came out smaller than she had intended, revealing fears that she hadn't fully acknowledged even to herself. Vincent's expression softened fractionally. "Then you'll take care of my son and make sure he grows up knowing that his father loved him more than life itself." The casual way Vincent spoke of his own potential death made Sophia's chest tighten with emotions she wasn't ready to examine. Somewhere in the past 3 weeks, between late-night conversations about Marco's nightmares and shared meals that felt more like family dinners than professional obligations, she had begun to care about Vincent Torino as more than just her employer. "Don't talk like that," Sophia said fiercely. "Don't you dare talk like you're not coming home." Vincent studied her face with the same intensity he brought to evaluating potential threats, cataloguing details that might reveal information he needed to understand. "Would it matter to you if I didn't?" The question hung between them like a loaded weapon, demanding honesty that neither of them might be prepared to handle. Sophia felt her heart hammering against her ribs as she realized that her answer would change everything between them. "Yes," she said quietly. "It would matter. Marco needs his father. And I—" "And you?" Vincent prompted, stepping closer with the fluid movement that reminded Sophia of a predator closing distance to prey. "I need you to come home too," Sophia admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "Not just for Marco, for me." The silence that followed carried the weight of recognition, acknowledgement of feelings that had been building beneath the surface of their carefully maintained professional relationship. Vincent reached up to touch Sophia's face, his fingers tracing the line of her cheek where Tony's blow had left a fading bruise. "Sophia," Vincent said, her name carrying implications that made her breath catch. "You understand what you're saying, what it means to care about someone in my world?" "I understand that it's dangerous," Sophia replied. "I understand that it makes both of us vulnerable to people like Salvatore Coretti. I understand that it complicates everything. And I don't care." The words came out with more force than Sophia had intended, revealing the depth of feeling she had been trying to suppress. "I've spent 3 weeks watching you be an incredible father, watching you build a world where Marco can be safe and happy, despite everything you have to do to maintain that safety. I've seen you worry about my happiness, plan for my comfort, and blame yourself for dangers that weren't your fault." Vincent's hand stilled against her cheek, his expression caught between hope and something that looked like pain. "You don't know everything I've done, everything I'm capable of doing." "I know you're capable of protecting the people you love," Sophia said firmly. "I know you're capable of killing to defend your family. I know you're capable of making impossible choices to keep Marco safe, and I know that none of that changes how I feel about you." The admission hung in the air between them, transforming their relationship from professional necessity to something far more complex and dangerous. Vincent was looking at her as if she were something precious and fragile, something that could be broken by the violence that surrounded his life. "Papa!" Marco's voice called from the kitchen, breaking the moment with the innocent timing that children seem to specialize in. "Sophia, the castle fell down." Vincent stepped back, but his eyes never left Sophia's face. "We'll finish this conversation when I get home." "Promise me you'll come home to finish it," Sophia said, reaching out to straighten his tie with fingers that only barely trembled. Vincent caught her hands in his, holding them against his chest where she could feel the steady rhythm of his heartbeat. "I promise Salvatore Coretti is not going to take me away from you, either of you." As Vincent walked toward the front door, Sophia felt the weight of their unfinished conversation settling over her like a blanket. She had crossed a line from which there would be no return, acknowledged feelings that made her a target as much as a protector. But watching Vincent's confident stride as he left to handle threats against their family, Sophia realised that some risks were worth taking, especially when the alternative was losing the people who had become her entire world. She returned to the kitchen where Marco waited with his collapsed cereal box castle, ready to rebuild from the ruins with the resilient optimism that made children such natural survivors. "Don't worry," Marco said, apparently reading her expression with the intuitive accuracy that he had inherited from his father. "Papa always comes home, even when the bad men try to stop him." Sophia pulled Marco into a hug that was as much for her comfort as his, holding tight to the boy who had become her anchor in Vincent's dangerous world. "Yes, he does. Your papa always comes home." Outside, she could hear the sound of Vincent's armoured car pulling away from the mansion, carrying him toward a confrontation that would determine not just his own fate, but the future of the family they had built together in the space between protection and love. All Sophia could do was wait, hope, and trust that the man she had fallen for was as dangerous to his enemies as he was gentle with the people he loved.